Hello, good afternoon. Everybody, those coming in, if we could all take a seat. So I am doing the introduction, which actually turned out more just to get people in and sit down. So my name is Sarah Coward. I'm a partner here at Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer, which is quite a mouthful now. I'm absolutely delighted that so many of you could join us today as part of Climate Week. And we are delighted, really delighted to be hosting this event today for the Climate Governance Forum. And in partnership with E3G, the International Climate Councils Network, the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, and TA Collaborative. It's a phrase that is often used, but we're at one of those times as a critical juncture. I've seen recent scientific analysis that is showing that we are not on track to reach net zero. And in fact, in the next few years, we are 70% likely to be over that 1.5%. And in fact, this year or last year, we were. So what can we do about it? And this is part of it. So bringing people together, building these connections, discussing, coming to views and building, in this case, this governance for it. So we think at HSF Kramer that this is a critical and this is an important part of it, and which is why we were one of the founding members of the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance. And we have this afternoon an action-packed agenda for you with lots of fantastic speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Carla, who is the Associate Director of Political Economy and Governance at E3G, to kick things off.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Herbert Smith Freehills for hosting us today. That is really, really important way that we can support this gathering. So welcome to London for those of you who've travelled from afar to be with us today. Thank you and welcome to London Climate Action Week. You are part of the largest ever London Climate Action Week. This is the 7th edition. We've got more than 700 events happening across London this week. I can say that because I do also organise the festival, so I can tell you that there are more than 700 events out and about across London. So do go and check some of those out. Welcome to the Climate Governance Forum at London this year. We've got more than 200 people in the room today. It's thrilling to see how many people are connected and want to be part of this discussion. I think sometimes we think that climate governance or governance might be a little bit boring. Rick Smith from Canada this morning said that actually part of their mission at the Canadian Climate Institute is to make climate boring again. And I think I know what he was talking about in the current political climate that we're in. But also, I think we also know that we really need to elevate the role and the value of governance and to understand how critical it is to meet the challenges that we know we need to. So London Climate Action Week really invites us to work in the spirit of radical collaboration, creativity and connection. So this afternoon is really an opportunity to do that. So we're going to work in different structures. We'll be in this plenary together for some of the time, and then we're moving into some different spaces for some different conversations and then bringing them back together. I also wanted to let you know that London Climate Action Week, which started in 2019, has been host for a number of years to a number of different climate governance and legal topics and events. So this event today really builds on that history and that base. And it is also wonderful, I have to say, to see so many familiar faces as well as so many new faces in the room today. So London Climate Action Week supported the emergence of some new initiatives like the Professional Bodies Climate Action Charter, the Chancery Lane project, really demonstrating that kind of value of creativity, collaboration, and sparking ideas. The first London Climate Action Week saw a groundbreaking convening of general councils looking at climate action from an in-house lawyer's point of view. Climate Week was also the platform for launching the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance that Sarah mentioned. Since 2019, London Climate Action Week has also been the regular annual slot for the LSE Grantham Global Trends in Climate Litigation Report. The 2025 launch will happen later tonight at LSE, and you're all invited to move across there later. There are also a number of ways through London Climate Action Week that we also engage with parliamentarians, including working through the Globe Legislators Network. And one of the regular features at London Climate Action Week has been meetings between students with their MPs. We've done that in London through a number of years. This London Climate Action Week, 10 MPs from across London boroughs will be meeting with students from their constituencies to talk about their concerns around climate. We've also done student MP surgeries in Nairobi in past London Climate Action Week. So this is not limited to what we do in London. So the agenda for today at Climate Governance Forum really is, and E3G and International Climate Councils Network are delighted to be working with the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance and also with the TAI Collaborative, the Trust, Accountability and Inclusion Collaborative. And really what we want to do is do that job of starting to think about how do we elevate governance in our national agendas, in the international climate agenda. How do we think about, secondly, thought leadership and in a way practice leadership in relation to climate governance. A lot of what I see now is really governance in action, and people want to talk about action and progress, and this is a way that we can actually take stock and see where we've come from and the progress that we're making. And the third part of our agenda is really to also think about how do we start to build the field in this area through events like this, but also on a day-to-day and year-to-year basis. How do we develop our communities of practice? You're all part of your own community of practice, but how do we also connect those different communities of practice today? We want to do some of that between the lawyers and the business side of things, between governments and other stakeholders. So the format today, as I said, we're going to do a mix of kind of plenary and interactive roundtables. We have the business roundtable that will be happening later. I'll give you more details around that. We've got a climate framework climate laws session with Client Earth and Globe legislators. And then we've also got a discussion around accountability and climate finance led by TAI. So I also wanted to let you know that today and Governance Day, London Climate Action Week has also been part of an opportunity to bring the International Climate Councils Network together. This is a group that was launched at COP26, the climate COP that was hosted by the UK. The network has more than 25 members. These are bodies that are nationally officially mandated to advise their governments on climate policy and action that ranges from the UK Committee on Climate Change through to South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission, to many more from Chile, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, many across Europe, from Finland, Sweden, Denmark. Lots of them are in the room with you today, so do take the chance to talk to them. Some of you have been involved in designing climate laws, designing climate bodies. These are really the people who put that into action on a day-to-day and a year-to-year basis. Over the last 2 years, I've had the honor at E3G of setting up a partnership with the International Climate Councils Network and setting up a secretariat, and that has been a real honor and joy. So above the agenda, I also wanted to give you sort of 3 thoughts before I invite Ben Rhodes to come and talk to you. The kind of meta things that are in my mind when I'm thinking about climate governance. And I wanted to invite you to think about those today. The first was around scale. London Climate Action Week, I'm saying it's growing. It's growing not because we just have a growth agenda, but because climate action is growing and we need it to be very big in order to meet the challenge. So I wanted you to think about scale in relation to governance. How do we scale? How do we norm the things that we know are working, the solutions that we have? and how do we develop best practice. The second is around innovation. I don't think we have all of the answers, and we constantly have new challenges and ways that we need to learn. So how do we learn from each other, and how do we develop new solutions and new ideas? And the final one was around resilience. I think we've been having some discussions in the International Climate Council's network. We're all working in a very quickly evolving political environment. How do we think about resilience for institutions, but also information integrity, scientific resilience, climate resilience, and also political resilience? So those were my sort of meta thoughts around scale, innovation, and resilience that you might want to see how they come up through the discussions that you have today. So I'm going to leave it there. I will be guiding you through the agenda and helping you get to the appropriate points in various different rooms and coming back together at the right times. So I'm delighted to do that. For now, I would like to introduce my colleague, Ben Rhodes, the head of the ICCN Secretariat, which it's been a pleasure to invite Ben here. The Secretariat team working with the network has been doing an incredible amount of work thinking around a toolkit about climate councils, and I'm delighted to pass over to Ben. Thank you.
There's one issue, which is taking the phones over there, and I think we're good to go. Good. Thank you, Carla, and thank you everyone for coming. It's great to see such interest from such a wide range of stakeholders, and I think that's a real recognition of the importance of good governance to the climate agenda. As Carla said, we've been really pleased to welcome 30 people from the International Climate Council's network to London, from 16 different councils around the world. We're also joined online by a lot of people, so I'd like to also thank everyone who's watching the live stream, in particular many of our climate councils, including Nigeria and South Africa, and councils we're hoping will join soon in Brazil, Pakistan, in Jersey, and many other places around the world. So my name's Ben, and I head the Secretariat of the ICCN. As Carla says, today we are trying to kickstart momentum and build a community to improve governance at all levels. And also we are launching our Climate Council Toolkit, which I'm very excited to do, and I'll talk you through that in this session. So governance is a multifaceted issue, and the Energy, Climate and Intelligence Unit did some excellent analysis to look at what are the essential components of good governance. And we'll explore a lot of this through the various sessions throughout the day. And first, we're going to focus, before we kind of broaden out to cover everything, we're going to have a real focus on climate councils. They kind of actually play, they're kind of independent expert advisors, but they play a fundamental role in delivering nearly all of the other parts of good governance as well. So I think that's why we think they're so important, and hopefully we'll show you why and how as we go through. So let me start by what we mean by a climate council. So they are called different things. They're not all councils. We do have, in the UK, we have the UK Climate Change Committee as a member. We have commissions, we have authorities, but fundamentally, they all advise and have an official mandate from government to advise on climate. The first one set up in law was the UK Climate Change Committee in 2008, and many others have followed with climate framework laws with councils, but there are other mandates in terms of contractual long-term arrangements and ministerial decrees. They also have expertise in climate science, policy, and other related fields. Many have academic backgrounds who make up the actual councils, but they also bring in business, civil society, and other perspectives as well, including Indigenous peoples, to make sure that there's a diverse knowledge that informs their advice. Some also have kind of political appointments chairing the councils. So in South Africa and Nigeria, the president of the country actually chairs the commissions, with then kind of different ministers and experts on the committees and councils, and an expert secretariat. Their role varies, but broadly they undertake the following functions: And a lot of this, I should say, we've built on excellent work from several academics, such as Ecologic, Rantham, and many more, to build this. So I should kind of credit, this isn't all our own thinking, but we draw on the community already to kind of analyse the role of councils. The main role they play is advising on climate policy, and this is central to all councils. But nearly all also play the watchdog function. So that's the other side. How is government doing and taking account progress in terms of GHG emission reduction, but also progress on policies, transition milestones. Many also play a convener role. And there are kind of two real angles to this. So there's the engaging the public and stakeholders to build consensus. But many, such as in Republic of Korea and in South Africa, play a kind of cross-coordination role, convening role across government. So making sure that government policy across all the different ministries adds up and kind of aligns with carbon neutrality plans. And many also play a mitigation focus, but a lot also have an adaptation and mitigation remit. Others also have just transition squarely within their remit, and some also look at biodiversity. But our members all are kind of have a specific climate focus, but within that there is quite some variation. A new development we've seen is councils also starting to implement as well. So our newest member, the Malta Climate Action Authority, are here today. So we have Abigail and Margaret. I can't see them, but they're here somewhere. They were set up to fill a critical gap between policy design and practical implementation. So as well as advising, they also have regulatory powers as well. And in South Africa and Pakistan and Nigeria, they are playing a leading role in country platforms and investment plans too. So if that's what we mean by a council, then who is the ICCN? So the ICCN was originally set up in 2021 at COP26, and it's a member-led network with the decisions taken by consensus by all members at plenary. However, it was only last year that the network secured core funding from the European Climate Foundation and member contributions, which allowed them to create a full-time secretariat that is hosted by E3G. So I'm very grateful for this, not just because it pays my wage, but because of the impact it has allowed us to have over the last year. The network is truly global, so you can see on the map, there are 26 members from 6 continents, covering all parts of the world, from Guatemala to Greece, from the Philippines to France. It's a truly global network. And they're currently all national climate councils, plus the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change. But this map doesn't tell the whole story. Over the last year, we've seen huge interest in joining the network from newly created councils. So we have already invited an additional 10 national climate councils to join as observers as we support them to become full members. And we've also created associate membership status so that subnational advisory bodies can benefit from collaboration internationally, as we know how important the subnational governments are for implementing climate ambition. And we've already had an application from New South Wales in Australia, and we welcome many more to join us. But why should countries or states create councils? What's in it for them? Well, climate councils are uniquely valuable for a range of reasons, and I've set out kind of 5 here. Firstly, they create political space for ambitious policy. They do this by following the science. And this allows them to say things that government aren't able to, and this helps shift the dial on what is politically possible. And we've seen this in a number of ways, and you can see case studies in our policy brief. A good one is the EU Scientific Board's advice on a 2040 greenhouse gas target of 90%, which has now been taken on by the Commission and is going through the motions of approval, and hopefully there's good news in the next few months. Secondly, they create transparency and accountability, and they do this through their watchdog role, often publishing their advice and often reporting to Parliament. Thirdly, they build consensus. As I say, they play a leading role on public participation, citizen assemblies, and other participatory democracy tools. And they engage with stakeholders too, from farmers to financiers. Having a council demonstrates climate leadership at home and abroad. and we have seen countries be inspired by existing councils to create their own, both at the national and now we're seeing at the subnational level. And finally, they improve investor certainty. And the reason they do this is because councils create long-term sectoral pathways and they're institutions that exist beyond the 4 to 5 year political cycles. This builds trust a country will stick to its low carbon growth plans and creates that investor certainty that's needed for the climate action. So I could go on with case studies, but I'll let you dive into them in the policy brief in your own time. Which brings me on to the very exciting launch of our toolkit. So this is an online toolkit, and you can find it on our website. It's gone live today. It's a practical guide and contains lessons from ICCN members and leading researchers on how to design an impactful climate advisory body. It also provides basic information on what is a climate council, why they're important, and some analysis of their different shapes and sizes around the world. There are 17 steps in total, and within each step, you'll see case studies from our members or citations from academic literature, which explains how they've undertaken that step in their own jurisdiction. When we started to create the toolkit, we were hoping for maybe 5 or 6 of our members to contribute. We ended up with 23 of the 26 members contributing. And I think this is testament to the vibrancy of the network and the desire to share learning with others, which I think is a really positive thing for our network. And I think that's augmented by everyone making the effort from New Zealand to Canada, to Korea to come here in person this week. So thank you to our members. As well as the in-depth case studies, we also have short videos to help bring the toolkit to life. And this includes videos from South Africa, Ukraine, Chile, and New Zealand, who are all at different stages in their journey. But I wanted to play a short introduction video from Emma Pinchbeck, CEO of the UK Climate Change Committee. So I will hand over to my colleagues who can hopefully click play for us.
Welcome to the International Climate Councils Network's Interactive Toolkit, your practical guide to establishing a climate council. I'm Emma Pinchbeck, Chief Executive of the UK's Climate Change Committee. The CCC, as we often call it, became the first independent climate advisory body of its kind when it was established under the UK's Climate Change Act in 2008. The CCC has an official mandate to provide long-term advice to UK politicians on climate change policy. The CCC also has legal mandates under the Climate Change Acts for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to advise the UK's devolved governments on their own carbon budgets and ambitions for emissions reduction. Since we've been established, the CCC has advised government on carbon budgets and emissions targets, assessed the UK's climate change risks, and published progress reports to Parliament to hold government accountable for delivery. With over a decade and a half of experience, we are always seeking to innovate and improve, and we have found great value in sharing lessons learned with fellow climate councils through the ICCN. As you explore this toolkit, you will find a collection of case studies from the ICCN members, supported by academic research, to help you establish an effective council. Drawing on the diversity of the network and recognising that every geography is unique, the toolkit allows you to select the most relevant lessons for you from the experience of all the councils in the ICCN. The toolkit is split into 3 sections. First is the groundwork, which helps you lay the foundations for success. Second is the establishment phase. This is the stage of securing an official mandate for your council, appointing its members, and beginning your work of advising the government. Third is continuous improvement. This is the stage the CCC is currently in and what I spend a lot of my time as Chief Exec thinking about. So please have a look around, and whatever stage you're at with building your council, the ICCN is here to support you, so please do get in touch.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, so the toolkit's there. I'll end with a QR code so you can access it directly in a moment. But it's not just a toolkit that we offer, and we're trying to offer a more holistic approach to supporting new councils. So we do this in many ways, but in particular, we kind of at the groundwork stage have regional engagement strategies. We're hoping to recruit and have people in the different regions of the world. We have a mentor scheme. So when a new member joins, they have a direct 12-month relationship with senior and working level members from an established council to share that in-depth knowledge. And finally, on continuous improvement, we have in-depth working groups on mitigation, adaptation, and governance and comms, so our members can build those communities at a working level to enrich their work. So I'll end with the QR code, which feel free to scan. And I want to conclude with a simple message. If you are seeking to set up a climate council, whether at a national or subnational level, we're here to help. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Rick Smith. So Rick is the president of the Canadian Climate Institutes, one of the founding members of the ICCN, and also interim chair of the ICCN. So he's been pivotal in driving the work over the last 2 years, and I want to welcome Rick to the stage and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much. Joe and Andre, do you want to come up? Great. Thanks, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been torturing my two teenage children with beautiful photos of London the last few days, sending them back home. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. I want to begin by clarifying something that Carla said at the outset, where she revealed the secret kind of joking mission of the Canadian Climate Institute, which is to make climate change boring again. I want to underline that I'm not saying there that we are boring or that you are boring. We are, of course, passionate, committed climate change advocates. What we're trying to get at inside our institute is that we're the people whose job it is to create continuity in the climate change discussion, to take this issue that is so often fraught with difficulty and contention and controversy, and to try to ensure, regardless the political cycle of the moment, regardless the media cycle of the moment, maintain some momentum and predictability for the climate change discussion, and to settle our country down into an annual rhythm of planning, tracking, and continual improvement when it comes to emission reduction. And I think that's really what all the members of the International Climate Councils Network try to do. As Ben mentioned, it's interesting. Our origin stories, we kind of organically found each other around the world. We kind of just found each other online. We launched this international network together at COP26. So we're young. We're both 4 years old. Some of our members are even younger than that, 2 years old. But I think it's fair to say that that the reason that these 26 busy, exclusively nationally focused organizations have decided to work together internationally is because of a conviction that this climate council model works. It works well in terms of producing measurable results, in terms of pushing the climate agenda forward. Yes, we deal with kind of particularities in each of our countries. Every country has something somewhat different going on, but we're all essentially dealing with the same challenges and driving towards the same solutions. I'm so grateful to be working with colleagues from around the world in this international network. And I'm really delighted to be joined by two incredible colleagues here today. Joe Hendy, Chief Executive of Hei Po Arangi, the New Zealand Climate Change Commission, and Andrei Katura, the head of Ukraine's Green Transition Office. And we all sit together on the International Climate Council Network with 23 other fantastic colleagues. So we're gonna talk for 15 minutes or so, give you an insight into some of the diversity of our national challenges, but also, you know, some of the similarities in terms of what we're trying to deal with and accomplish together. And then we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. There's a lot of expertise in this room, not just from other colleague climate councils, but from lawyers, elected leaders who are dealing with this notion of how to field a more effective climate change governance over the next few years. So we're going to turn it over to you for about 15, 20 minutes for a Q&A. Joe and Andre, why don't we get started? Why don't you just take a couple of minutes each and explain a little bit about how climate change governance works in your countries and where your organizations fit in. What sort of role do you occupy in those systems?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, is this working? Oh,
yeah.
Great. Hey, well, thank you very much, and it's brilliant to be here today. It's so inspiring to be at London Climate Week more generally, but fantastic to be face to face with other climate councils who are facing really very, very similar challenges and doing very similar work, of course, in our different political contexts. The New Zealand Climate Change Commission, we're anchored in legislation, and that legislation has within it our climate targets, our long-term climate targets, and sets up the institutional accountability for government to then put in place the policies to deliver those climate targets. The Commission's role is to provide that independent evidence-based advice on the kinds of policies and actions that need to will help take the country to our long-term targets. And also, as already been discussed, we annually monitor progress so that it's very transparent to people how the country is tracking. It gives signals to government around course correction, and it really enables that public accountability. We bring science and policy together, and we at the Commission have a broad set of considerations that we need to follow through on when we're giving advice. So while the end goal is around climate resilience and reduction in emissions, we also have to think about the just transition elements across different sectors. We think about impacts on our Indigenous people and making sure that we are giving effect to the foundational document in New Zealand, the Treaty of Waitangi. And we are also required to think about future generations. So intergenerational equity is a key part of our legislation as well. We are independent, but we're not isolated. So we walk this fine line of standing back and providing credible challenge to the short-term politics of the day, but at the same time being collaborative enough to help shape the transition. And so that's a really careful line that we try and walk, so that we're not always standing at the sidelines shouting, but we're actually helping politicians through different election cycles take those harder political decisions that need to happen. And really what we bring to the table, the obvious thing is the rigor. We have a strong analytical set of analysts within the Commission, but we're about keeping the long term in view and making sure that everyone is clear of whether the country's on track for our long-term goals or not.
Thanks so much, Andre.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends. Thank you for having me here. My name is Andriy Kitora. I'm the head of Green Transition Office from Ukraine. As Rick mentioned, some of the councils are even younger than the network. Probably our council is one of the most, the younger around the world. We were established in October last year. I will briefly describe climate architecture, climate governance in Ukraine, and then a couple of words about the role and mandate of our office. Basically, climate governance in Ukraine includes like a parliament, government, or cabinet of ministers, particular ministries and local authorities and administrations. All strategic documents go through the committee dedicated to environment and climate in our parliament. But it's very common practice in Ukraine to discuss issues related to climate change also with a committee dedicated to energy sector, to internal economic policy, to finance and taxes. So usually it's really open, transparent process which involves I would say all stakeholders in the parliament. Cabinet of ministers or our government adopt all strategic documents like climate adaptation strategy, low emission development strategy, etc. But in practice, Ministry of Environment is in charge for developing such documents, for coordinating all other ministries around the government. But what I need to admit that for last couple of years, other ministries took much more significant part into this process. For example, Ministry of Economy, in accordance to our climate law, which was adopted also in October last year, is responsible for developing and implementation sectoral decarbonization strategies and sectoral climate adaptation strategies. So in general, as I said, government is adopting documents. Ministry of Environment is proposing the legislation, the plans and strategies. But naturally, that some sectoral policies, sectoral plans should be implemented by responsible ministries. Like it works like that in Ukraine. We also have very similar instruments, very similar responsibilities on local levels. But as of now, let's say the key topics, the key discussions are on the national level primarily. About our office, Green Transition Office was established by first Vice Prime Minister. So basically, it's the order by first Vice Prime Minister. Basically, it's the second person in our government, and like we are, let's say, sitting near the Ministry of Economy. The idea is that from the perspective or from the position of Ministry of Economy and the second person in the government, it's a better position to coordinate efforts of different ministries and to support them. Ben showed very nice slides with different roles of councils around the world. I would say that fortunately or unfortunately, we are not only a watchdog. Very often we also implement some policies instead or in addition or supporting other ministries. In that way, basically, we are helping them and filling gaps in different spheres. One of our key responsibility as of now is monitoring of implementation national energy and climate plan. This is like one of instruments developed by the European Union and used by EU member states, not only but mostly to have a achievable and quite straightforward plan to achieve climate targets. For example, now like we are working on the plan till 2030. I would probably stop here. Thank you very much again. We'll be ready to answer your question.
Andre and Joe, thanks so much. And Andre, I think we need, I want to acknowledge that any climate advocate in this day and age has a difficult job. I know we all work hard, but nobody has a more challenging job than you in this. And working with you and your council is truly inspiring in terms of the work you're doing to ensure that Ukraine, the rebuilding of Ukraine after this terrible war is based on sustainability, and it's great. I'm proud to work with you in this network.
Thank you very much. If you allow me, like one short phrase here, like one of our key achievement truly at the moment that we let's say now climate change is a part of each discussion regarding rebuilding of Ukraine after the war. So, I mean, it was not the case a couple of years ago. I mean, government and like we also took small, but I believe important role in this process. We are pushing them to include in each and all strategies, each and all project component dedicated to climate change. Like if you are going to rebuild something, it makes sense to build it properly from the very beginning. And usually it's cheaper than just repeat something which was destroyed before.
Thank you. We're going to do another quick sort of lightning round here before we go to the audience. And Joe, ultimately we're doing this work. We're working for these organizations because we can see the measurable impact in terms of emission reduction that this model produces, this Climate Council model produces. So give us an example of a specific moment or a policy or a decision in New Zealand that the Commission impacted in a beneficial way.
Yeah, sure. I think probably the proudest moment was when we gave our first actual piece of advice, where we were charting out the emissions pathway to 2035, what we were recommending within an emissions budget approach, and the government adopted our independent pathway, and that was a fantastic moment. What was even better was that when we had an election and we changed from the government that established us to a different government, so we went from a centre left to a centre right, the new centre right government also endorsed and recommitted to the budgets that the Commission had recommended. And that was a fantastic moment. And that was something that we'd worked very hard to position the Commission as apolitical. We worked across party lines all the time and across different sectors. So incredibly rewarding result of a lot of hard work.
It's fantastic. Andre.
It's the same question.
Same question.
Okay. Probably from, like, as I said, we're really young in terms of our history and capacity. But what I need to admit, recently we finished our work dedicated to implementation of public investment management reform in Ukraine. We were asked by our government to recommend the, let's say, they are calling it green criteria, which could be implemented in this reform. And basically it means that each project for rebuilding of Ukraine, nevertheless we are speaking about small school or large factory, should include some climate criteria. The idea was to analyze our partners, IFIs who are working in Ukraine, different stakeholders, all of them have very similar but a little bit different criteria, different frameworks, all of them, but so basically it took us 6 months to have a broad stakeholder discussion, analyze available frameworks and propose something simple but credible. Our advice was based on implementation of some component of EU taxonomy in Ukraine, in particular do not significantly harm principle, which potentially could be implemented even in small projects. And also we proposed our government kind of roadmap. So we are starting this year with small piece, with really small step towards EU taxonomy and comprehensive green criteria, and we are moving through next couple of years. As of now, it's planned for 3 years, and simultaneously we will train our local communities, our local and central authorities to work with such criteria. So why it's important? As of now, we have more than 10,000 different investment projects dedicated to small communities or, I say, large factories in Ukraine, and it's kind of a mess. When you should you need some way to score each of that project to understand which is more, how to say, more feasible for Ukraine or better aligned with our strategies, etc. So definitely you need to have some such, or at least any criteria, yeah. That's why this task was quite challenging. Hopefully, at the beginning of July, our government will adopt recommendations and criteria which were produced basically by us, and hopefully we will rebuild Ukraine using also principles which will include climate mitigation, climate adaptation, circularity, biodiversity, etc.
Thanks so much. I should add that we were hoping that our longtime colleague Dumasani Numalo from the South African Presidential Climate Commission would be here with us today. He was not able to be here. He would have added a lot to the discussion. The PCC is doing incredible stuff in South Africa, whether it's electricity transformation, engagement across all segments of South African society. So I just wanted to give him a shout out because he wasn't able to be here. Okay, I think we have a roving microphone. We already have one eager questioner here putting his hand up. We got lots of eager questioners. I love it. So Izzy, our hardworking colleague, is going to bring the microphone around for you. Can you please just, as you're asking the question, just introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Barry Gardner. I'm a member of the UK Parliament. It was this question specifically for Joe about New Zealand, because when you first brought out your pathway, I think it was that 40% of your emissions, of course, are from methane from agriculture, and they're exempt under the New Zealand system. Is that still the case, and how have you proposed to address that?
We have a target for methane, so they're not exempt, they're just separate to our net zero target. So the New Zealand system has a target reduction of 24 to 47% by 2050, which was derived from the 2018 sixth assessment report. So that's the situation with methane. It is roughly half of New Zealand's emissions. So it is a massive a contributor to our footprint. There has been various attempts over decades to bring agriculture into the New Zealand emissions trading scheme, and for various reasons, every time that's almost happened, it's stalled, and people have gone back to the drawing board. So that's still a work in progress. The current government has signalled that it wants to bring in a price-based incentive by 2030, but really where the government is putting its effort now is in research for low emissions mitigation options for agriculture. So that's the government's approach, obviously. That's separate from what the Commission advises. But more broadly, I think one thing in New Zealand that farming is a key, really strong part of our culture. You know, so while we do a lot of sectoral analysis and can think about things from a cost-effective point of view and what's technically feasible, I think that element is really important to bring into the consideration, because what we really want is we want credible but durable delivery. And so that also involves bringing hearts and minds and actually working with those cultural aspects of our society.
Okay, thank you. Just over here, sir, and then Izzy. After that, we've got a couple of folks over here. Go ahead.
Thank you, John Falasto from MEGA, which stands for Mobilizing an Earth Governance Alliance, and we look at governance at the level of the Earth because of the integration of the Earth system and its global nature. So, given that climate change is a global challenge, an obvious idea is a global climate council as floated by the Brazilian COP presidency this year. Is ICCN working on global climate council, and if not, might it like to?
Thank you for that enticing question. The answer is no, not at the moment. I mean, I have a few things to say here. One of them is an excuse. We're very young. We're in the toddler phase of our life. where we've just found our feet and we're trying to figure out. I mean, our main challenge is to make sure that this international network that we've formed is providing a value add to these exclusively nationally focused organizations. That's our project at the moment. Is how can we trade lessons learned? How can we get better together? How can we make sure, as Ben outlined, I mean, we're putting a lot of energy into helping similar organizations get off the ground in other countries. And it's very exciting that's happening. So that's our focus at the moment, is spreading this model to other countries.
Hi, Alex Scott with Echo. Picking up on this global challenge theme, I'm really interested to hear how you all see the role of climate councils in proposing international policies or partnership ideas that countries should be taking on. I know, for example, Australia's Climate Council have made a recommendation that the government pursue more clean technology partnerships, and wonder whether that's something that you guys could see happening in Ukraine and New Zealand as well, if that's something that's in your remit already as your roles as your climate councils, and whether it's something that perhaps the network could help build learnings between councils and help them identify together what some of the partnership opportunities could be.
Yeah, so at the front of certainly my mind is what partnerships can we establish through the network, really identifying those councils that are facing very similar political and social situations. And that's part of actually what we've been trying to explore over the last 2 days as we've come together. So yeah, it's very much at the forefront of my thinking. I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Thank you very much for the question. I do believe that this network is a very good partnership, and potentially in future we could extend it, enhance, and hopefully we will see new members of the network. Speaking from our position, we do see a huge value in discussions with our colleagues from other countries, which have much more experience and a very good track record. For example, in the UK, the council exists 17 years, if I remember correctly. In many countries, more than 10 years. For us, as I said, this network is such a partnership which truly helps us to understand, the best way to proceed, the best way to support our government, the best way to bring this added value to our national government.
Our network is so young. This question and answer period is helping inform our to-do list. This is like real-time planning happening right here. It's very exciting, actually. We got lots and lots of hands waving. This woman right at the front.
My name is Jennifer from the Stockholm Environment Institute. My question is to Rick. For the past couple of days, we've heard about climate investment. There's this pressure from asset owners putting pressure on asset managers to ensure cleaner investments, which also means that the private sector has a key role in the climate discussion. My question is, are we considering the private sector into the ICCN and their view?
Thank you. I know that I'll start by speaking about our institute. I mean, as with many of our individual councils, a big part of our job is ensuring that the private sector is also moving forward. So we spent a lot of time over the last few years, for instance, looking at the EU Sustainable Investment Taxonomy, the Australian taxonomy, ensuring that there's a kind of new rule book for climate-friendly investing. We've spent a lot of time trying to engage Canadian corporations and corporations operating in Canada in a dialogue about the best policy approaches. And I know our colleagues in other countries are engaged in a similar exercise. So I would say at an international level, in terms of our network, we haven't yet had that discussion. But I think it's fair to say we're all thinking about these things within our respective countries. I mean, maybe that's. I mean, at the very least, that's going to be an element of our exchange and getting better together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are thinking about how we can leverage the work we do to advise government to help unlock further private sector action. And I mean, already I know that major companies in New Zealand use our scenario work for their long-term planning. So, but what more can we be doing to smooth the path and encourage further action? That's a key question.
Thank you.
I think you're the last person we're going to take on this side of the room because all sorts of people waving over here. Izzy's got to run over there, you know.
Justin Reynolds from the Tishinga Partnership. We're an environmental venture builder, and we've just launched at Bonn a environmental market infrastructure. So my question is actually the other side of the coin to your very good question. How much is the ICCN and then the respective climate councils actually trying to reduce the amount of taxpayers' money that is being spent to drive the climate change that is needed, but to incentivize the private sector to come in and actually drive a market and underpin it? So you know, there are a lot of politics at the moment is around the increased cost of getting to net zero. I was with the Kenyan CCC yesterday when the riots were going on in Kenya, which is half driven by rising costs because of climate change, etc. So is that incentivizing private sector to actually underpin it rather than the top-down regulation? Is that part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think number one key value that certainly at the Commission in New Zealand we're always coming back to is how do we create that investment predictability? How do we, through the work that we do, looking through different political cycles, help to calm the swings back and forth between different policies, because that churn just wastes money, wastes time and time that we haven't got. So that's a key thing that we're always front of mind. But more generally, the cost effectiveness of the transition is right at the forefront, especially you know, when we're in a cost of living crisis and with all the difficulties people are facing right now.
May I add here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, as of now, we cannot be in the position to directly impact the spending, but what we are doing, or what we are planning to do, like we are working with our Ministry of Finance on climate tagging. We are working with our National Bank of Ukraine on a regulation for private and state-owned banks related to monitoring of sustainable flows, financial flows. Like as of now in Ukraine, you cannot say like what is the amount of sometimes, unfortunately, because of different reasons, we don't have actual data on, for example, direct and indirect fossil fuel subsidies, etc. So, like, to understand the problem, you need to measure it in some way. So, like, we are supporting the government in implementing respectful frameworks, which hopefully will support us to understand the position, the situation, and then try to affect and change it. Speaking about let's say private companies and private capital, here like our idea is indeed to implement EU taxonomy in Ukraine fully, and it will give us an instruments transparent and credible for our partners, international partners, and it will be really much more easy to track the flows. In addition to what I previously said about public investments, like Ukrainian reconstruction probably will be the biggest building after Second World War. We will have the instruments to monitor spending of public money, instruments to monitor spending of international donor funding and private capital. This is a plan. Like we are working on implement it.
Yeah. I'll add something very quickly, and then we'll go, I think, to a last question. In our country, and in terms of our organization's priorities, I mean, we don't really see it as an either or. I mean, I take your point that we need a lot more private capital entering this space, and there's a limit to what public treasuries can do. In Canada, we're still in the midst of creating a policy architecture that can facilitate that and other things. And to be honest with you, our challenge in North America at the moment, I think our real challenge is even more basic, which is, if you're going to track back most of the arguments that we need to win in the next few years, it boils down to we need to do this for the sake of Canada, and we need to do this even though Donald Trump isn't going to do it. Like many of the arguments that are thrown at us now from our business community, for instance, revolve around, Canada can't do that because federally the U.S. is not doing that. Donald Trump doesn't believe in that, so we can't do that. And so, one reason why I'm here this week, and one reason why we are delighted to be working with climate leaders around the world is as North Americans these days, we got to challenge Canadians, Canadian media, Canadian business leaders to look outside of North America and notice that the decarbonization agenda in all its various forms is proceeding and accelerating in the rest of the world. India just launched its carbon market. The EU is deadly serious about something in the neighborhood of 90% decarbonization by 2040. Decarbonization remains the price of admission in terms of investment decisions. It's an opportunity. It's not a cost. So we're back to, I'm not going to say we're back to square one in North America, but we're having to win much more basic arguments now in the wake of the US election. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I hope it's a good one, sir. Not that the last one wasn't excellent, but you're last up.
No pressure at all. Alex Murray, Climate Action Against Disinformation. You're talking about kind of arguments being thrown at you, and obviously climate disinformation is quite a significant one and a threat to climate action, whether that's from foreign interference or from other sorts of actors. I know we'll be hearing from Charlotte Scadden talking about the kind of information integrity work that's been going on from UN, UNESCO, and other different groups and organizations and countries. I was curious about what the ICCN and kind of some of the local councils are doing around the subject of information integrity and tackling climate misinformation.
Well, and so that has been actually a theme of discussion over the last couple of days. It's something that I'm particularly thinking about more and more, particularly with the advent of AI and preparing for potentially the onslaught of more disinformation, misinformation, and thinking about how people get information these days has changed so much. We can no longer rely on the mainstream traditional media to get a message out and to get that out clearly. So it's a key question: how do we engage the public and build trust in this environment? And where one of the foundational pieces for me is more and more face-to-face engagement, and engaging around different regions is a really important part of it. But it is a threat that we are thinking about, and advice is very, very welcome.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you to Joe and Andre. All right, here I am again over at the podium. It's my real pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Jim Ski. Jim is, of course, current chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for its 7th assessment cycle. He's professor of sustainable energy at Imperial College of London. He's co-author of the, I could go on and on here. He's co-author of the IPCC's 2018 special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees. Listen, all of that's really impressive, but I have to say closest to our hearts as climate councils. Jim, of course, was a founding member of the UK Climate Change Committee, and he is current chair of Scotland's Just Transition Commission, past chair of Scotland's Just Transition Commission. He's so busy, these things, Thank you so much for joining us. I know this is the last day of the Bonn Intersessional, a key moment of the year. We're so grateful for you joining us. Please give it up for Jim Ski.
Okay, thanks, Rick. And just to be very clear about my status, I'm currently chair of IPCC. I was the co-chair of Working Group 3 on mitigation. And the Working Group 3 role, I managed to overlap with being a founding member of the Committee on Climate Change in the UK, which I sat on for 11 years. And when they finally kicked me off, I became chair of Scotland's Just Transition Commission, because I had a formal contractual obligation to look after Scotland's interests on the Committee on Climate Change. Somebody cruelly said I have a good face for Scottish radio because I haven't lost my accent, even though I have actually been out of the country for a long time. And just to say, if anybody describes Scotland as a subnational entity, I won't be allowed back in the country again. So just to say, with these multiple roles, what I found really interesting was that they complemented each other. IPCC was, eyes to the horizon kind of activity. When I did the Scottish Just Transition Commission, it was feet on the ground. It was bus timetables in Dundee. It was issues like that came up. And the Committee on Climate Change was somewhere in between in terms of these different levels. But I thought I did each of the jobs better because I had the other roles as well, because it gave me the multiple perspectives. Now, I would also at this stage like to congratulate the ICCN as being an observer organisation of IPCC since February this year. So we look forward to seeing lots more of you to answer some of the questions about international engagement. Now, on climate councils, one of the things I looked back to the last IPCC report on mitigation, which had a chapter on policy and institutions, and it had a whole section devoted to climate councils, though I don't think it used quite that term. And at the time, it could identify 11 councils globally. That's now over 20, so a rapid growth even in the time scale that we've looked at. And I think the big conclusions were that national context really does matter, because some of the councils are really quite independent of government. They're kind of critical friends sitting outside the government system, while others are more embedded in government structures. And that gets down to issues like what the legal basis is for their formation and how appointments are made. There's a delicate issue. Would be better to talk about over a pint of beer rather than in a public room. But I think the other conclusions that came up, I think it's already been mentioned that climate councils can help create consensus. But the conclusion there was that it was consensus that had helped to create climate councils. The UK Climate Change Committee emerged at a time when there was a lot of cross-party consensus about climate policy, and that really moves things on. But it also concluded that if consensus begins to evaporate, it can actually send climate councils in the reverse direction. So that's something to be aware about. This consensus is really something that is valuable. Now, the other thing we do in IPCC, governments comment on the draft reports. So one of the things I did out of curiosity was to see what governments said about the draft report in terms of climate councils and what they came up with. There wasn't that much, but there were two comments. I've mentioned consensus going backwards. one country in which I may say consensus was identified as going backwards, needless to say, commented on the report and resulted in a little smoothing out of the language eventually in the final version. And another country commented and said, we've just created a climate council, why didn't you refer to it as a case study? And I think what both of these examples illustrate is the political importance attached to climate councils once they're actually established. If people are critical of the governments, it makes them sensitive. If they are being very positive, they become sensitive as well. Now, building on my experience on the Committee on Climate Change in the UK, as I said, it emerged at a time when there was a cross-party consensus, and it really advanced things as it moved through Parliament. And there was a will to make it an independent committee, going through the whole public appointments process and all the formality of that. I think. One other thing that made the CCC a lot of success was the analytical firepower that it brought to the job. It had a substantial secretariat that could carry out really good analytical work. And that really mattered because it meant the committee got a reputation, not only among environmental NGOs, but among business as well. And I could talk to people from the business sector that said the CCC reports were the most trusted pieces of analysis that you could find on climate in the UK, more than even the stuff coming out directly out of governments. Though I have to say one thing there was a lot of traffic underneath the surface between government analysts and CCC analysts as they shared information and moved the agenda forwards. I think one other thing that I would flag about the CCC in the UK is the kind of makeup. Is it about scientists or is it about stakeholders, and in which kind of mix actually is that? The UK committee has been dominated by scientists, I think it's fair to say, but it's not been exclusively scientists. And one of the things that helped it for a long time was having chairs who, I won't say they were politicians, but some were ex-politicians, but they were politically connected. And that meant that they could pick up phones to ministers and get access in a way. And that informal kind of traffic, I think, was a big feature of why the UK committee was successful. And the final thing I would say about the UK committee was this delicate question. When it's an advisor, is its advice accepted or not? Now, it's worthwhile saying that all the major pieces of advice were taken up. The carbon budgets, the targets for 2050 were taken on. And I should say there was also really important advice on electricity market reform. And the CCC was really engaged with the process by which we reformed our electricity markets in a way that allowed renewable energy to come through very quickly. But if you look at the more granular recommendations, I used to divide them into three groups. That's accepted, ignored, or accepted, and please look at the fine print in terms of how it's actually done. So I think there is this delicate relationship between government and independent committees. And I think it was good that the CCC in the UK was quite bold in some of its pieces of advice. On the Just Transition Commission, which is obviously a different kind of beast, it emphatically was not a scientific body. There were a couple of scientists on it, but most of the people came from stakeholder groups. They came from business, they came from environmental bodies, community groups, trade unions. And frankly, my role as a bearded professor, well, I wasn't there because I was a scientist. I was there because I wasn't one of the tribes, and that was the role that I actually played there. And it was very hard work to keep consensus going in that kind of arena. But it's important, really, that the social aspects, the economic consequences of climate action are addressed thoroughly, and we think about the fairness of the activities that are undertaken. So the just transition concept, I think, is important. And we decided that it didn't just apply to the workforce implications of moving out of fossil fuels. We spread it much more widely, effects on consumers from pricing of energy. We moved it out of the energy sector into areas like agriculture and land use. And we're also thinking about the adaptation implications as well, because adapting to climate change has important social consequences. So I'm not sure what I was supposed to do in this keynote. That's my little autobiography, as it were, in terms of IPCC and climate councils. I hope it's been of some interest. But it seems to me that it is incredibly important that this novel kind of institution, which is really quite recent, really has the ability to strengthen society's will to act on climate change, not just on reducing emissions, but also on adapting to inevitable changes as well. So I wish ICCN well, and on the history of the last few months since you became an observer of IPCC, I'm sure I'm going to have lots of connections with you. So thanks, Ben and others, for making the relationship work, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sir Jim. It was excellent to have you there and to have those reflections, I think, to contextualise your engagement and the kind of the we sometimes think of the climate councils in a way as the kind of the science to policy bridge, and that really demonstrated that very nicely. I'm going to let you have a short break, but I do need you to listen to some important instructions for the next session, because the next part of the agenda is when you're going to go to different places and you need to know where you're going to go. All of the spaces are on this floor of the firm. So if you find yourself leaving this floor, you've gone the wrong way. But other than that, let me assist you. So we have several round tables that are going to be taking place in parallel. If you're attending a round table, you are registered for that round table. So that's the first thing that you need to know. If you're not registered for a round table, you'll be staying here, so don't worry. So number one, we have the corporate case for science-aligned policy with We Mean Business and IIGCC. You are in C33 and 34. What way is that, Izzy? That way. That corner. Number two, Next Generation of Climate Laws with Client Earth and Globe. You are in C38 and 39. All that way? The rooms are numbered, helpfully. Number three, we have with the TAI Collaborative with Michael Jarvis and colleagues, Accountability of Climate Finance, and you are in C4041. And then staying in the room, you're all welcome here. We're going to continue the discussion with the International Climate Councils Network and really thinking about cross-government delivery, public participation and engagement. And we also have a special conversation with Charlotte Scadden from the UN looking at information integrity and the disinformation questions. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. So those are 4 different locations that you might be. And then we will all come back together. And we do have another little break. So the break now is going to be quite short. We have another little break, and then we do also have drinks at the end. So hold tight. Go for a break now. How long have they got? 10 minutes. You got 10 minutes, and then find your room. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Hopefully you're in the right room. This session is a panel discussion on bridging science, policy, and public support for climate action. So we're trying to broaden out the discussion from the focus on climate councils earlier to a more rounded discussion on how we bridge the science with the action. So if there are other breakout rooms, but hopefully the topic sounds exciting and interesting, and I can assure you we've got a brilliant panel who'll keep you entertained for 45 minutes or so. And then after 45 minutes, we will then switch to a fireside chat with a focus on information integrity. So I'm delighted to welcome a range of speakers today. So we have 3 guests. Firstly, we have Ussa Persson, who is a research director and deputy director at SEI. So Ursa is a social scientist, an expert on climate and sustainable development governance. And I'm very pleased to say she's also a very active and valued member of the ICCN, because she also chairs the Swedish Climate Policy Council. We also have Steph Venuti from the OECD. Steph is in the OECD's Environment Directorate and leads the Horizontal Initiatives team, including the OECD's whole of organization work on building climate and economic resilience, Net Zero Plus. And is also leading work for the OECD, contributing to COP30. And finally, we have Rich Wilson. And Rich is CEO of ISWE, a pioneer in democratic systems change, founder of Involve, and the Global Citizen Assembly founder as well, and a former senior ministerial advisor. And we've kind of worked on and off, I think we first 20 odd years ago, and recently kind of reconnected in this international climate governance space. So delighted to welcome Rich too. So if I could welcome our three guests on stage, Ursa, Steph, and Rich. Great. So I'll be facilitating the discussion. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And we'll try to kind of do 2 rounds of questions and then leave plenty of time for any questions that you may have for any of us. The first round of questions, we're actually going to try and focus, I guess, a bit on the global picture. So, you know, what is the science telling us? Where are the policy gaps? And how do we build that public support for climate action at a global level? And then we'll move on to the national level. So, Ursa, I'm going to turn to you first. We often talk about the gap between science and policy in delivering the Paris Agreement. But the truth is the scientific evidence is changing rapidly year on year. We're seeing the world change right before our eyes. So with your scientist hat on, can you tell us where new scientific insights could further increase the gap and what policymakers need to think about in terms of the latest science?
Yes, thank you. Wonderful to be here. I hope you hear me okay. Better? Yes, good. Yes, it's a tall order to follow Sir Jimsky, but I will keep it short. I mean, what we know from science, I'm a social scientist, but I do try to keep up with climate science as well. It's really the evidence is coming increasingly fast that climate change might be accelerating faster than we had thought. ICCN is an incredibly important authoritative source of scientific updates, not just on the climate change processes and climate impacts, but of course also mitigation and adaptation responses. But it's also an infrequent assessment with an inbuilt time lag. So actually one of the scientific initiatives that I'm part of is something called the 10 New Climate Science Insights. So this is an annual report produced by a big collective of scientists, which tries to actually have that faster turnaround and present the latest available scientific evidence to policymakers and negotiators. So this year we are indeed looking at this, you know, is there accelerated warming? Both land temperatures are increasing faster than thought, but also oceans, very concerning. Carbon sinks are declining. So this is overwhelming, I think, the scientific evidence, but also overwhelming scientific evidence on the co-benefits of taking climate action. And I'm really glad that you are going to talk to us about some of the recent evidence that the OECD have produced on that. But this is also something that we do at the institute I work at, Stockholm Environment Institute. We see how effective it is to present scientific evidence on what is not the sort of size of co-benefit, to quantify them, to monetize them. This is usually compelling evidence for policymakers to increase ambition. For example, public health benefits, and I think also what I tend to see more and more in these reports, benefits in terms of avoided labor productivity losses. So actually things like heat waves, of course, mean that people cannot work as much, and this will directly affect economic growth. So to wrap up here, I mean, there is a big gap, I think, between science and policy. And of course, I assume many in this room, including the councils, are working very hard to try and close that gap through having this dialogue, not just presenting evidence to policymakers, but I think very importantly, listening to policymakers, understanding what evidence they need to actually make change. And here I just again want to wear my National Climate Council hat and say I think these councils are really important as a complement to IPCC and that sort of international science policy interface. Because you need to contextualize science. Often it can be more impactful if you draw this evidence down to what does it mean at national level. And I love to hear Jim talk about this informal traffic, and I would say not just between councils and government, but also between scientists and policymakers. So it's not just the one single report, but it is going to lots of events, going to lots of panel debates, meeting people, and really trying to, talk about the science, not just on the urgency of the climate change, but also on all the solutions that we actually have. And let me know one more thing. I do think, actually, as a message to social scientists particularly, I think we can do a much better job, actually, also synthesizing what we know about what is effective climate policy. I know there are some initiatives now trying to do this sort of using AI, trying to synthesize what we know from policy evaluations, what actually work. But we can really make a big contribution, I think, in that space.
Thank you. Thank you. Steph, I'll move to you. So the OECD recently published a report on the case for enhanced NDCs, and this made the case that well-designed policies can deliver strong economic growth. Can you summarize some of the key findings from the report? And I think particularly, obviously, from any around strengthening governance and the interrelation between governance and enhanced NDCs. And also, I know you looked at the overlooked NAPs, National Adaptation Plans.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think just a quick comment on what Asa mentioned, because this communicating about data and giving governments the data they need, the confidence that they need to actually make ambitious policy is incredibly relevant in today's time. And this, I hope, okay. Particularly, this is something we're focusing a lot at the OECD. So how can the OECD use our value add in this space, which is the data, to underpin strong policy? So governments or others who think a government should perhaps be doing something can take that data and put it forward. How we communicate about it, though, I think is something that needs a lot more work. And all of us need to be working more on this and thinking about different ways of communicating. And it's really similar to what you said, Arthur, about the science. How do we get these messages out? And given all the misinformation, disinformation, which came up earlier, I feel that in the policy debate, this subject needs to actually take up a bit more room than maybe it has before. But let me come back to NDCs. So in the governance space, the climate governance space, I think NDCs are a great example because, oh yeah, it's not too. Okay, is that better? I don't know if that makes a difference. What if I move it? I'll just move it a bit closer. Sorry. Okay, let me. Better? Yeah, okay. That might be too. Sorry. So NDCs, oh yeah, that's a lot better. I think they're a great example because it's both the enhanced NDC, so the ambition element of it, and its implementation that really hinges on the right governance measures. Because if these NDCs aren't underpinned by well-designed and well-executed policies, those commitments aren't going to see the light of day. And if they're not enshrined with a good governance process and good governance measures, we're not going to get the right policies in place. So I think this really gets to the core of what we mean when we're talking about climate governance and what does climate governance mean today and the importance of it. I want to start a little bit by saying that there has been progress on this, so it's not all doom and gloom. We have 90% of the global economy is covered by net zero targets, and more than 40 countries have now decoupled GDP from emissions growth. So this is really important. It demonstrates that climate action does not come at the expense of economic expansion. But we have at the OECD a database called our Climate Action Policy Measurement Framework. This is showing that the pace of climate action has slowed down. It's 1 to 2% per year now, and this is down from 10% annually in previous years. So what can governments do to course correct this? I think the NDC process is the lever to make it happen. So the report that Ben mentioned, this is a recently released report with economic analysis done by the UNDP and OECD, and it provides an economic case for enhanced NDCs. So essentially, it gives governments the confidence that they can go ahead and make ambitious NDC policies and implement them, and there are economic opportunities that can be harnessed from that. Let me give you some statistics, because I wouldn't be OECD if I didn't do that. Enhanced NDCs can strengthen, not weaken economic growth, and would actually lead to an increase in global GDP by 0.2% by 2040 compared to current policies. And the modelling in the report also shows that by reducing the risk of climate-induced events, this doesn't include crossing climate tipping points because it's too difficult to model at this point in time, an enhanced NDC scenario could increase global GDP by up to 3% by 2050 and up to 13% by 2100. So the critical point here, though, is to make sure that those benefits are harnessed. The right governance measures need to be in place. Because as I mentioned, you can have an amazing, ambitious NDC, but if it's not implementable or investable, there's no point. So the 5 key priorities that we outline in the report is first to build political ownership across government. So we all know NDC's good climate action needs a whole of government approach, but it really needs the ministries of finance to get behind it, to secure the mandate, the resources and the buy-in within the government. The second is to align NDCs with national and local development priorities. So NDCs, we know they can't be a standalone commitment. They have to be integrated into these broader development, economic planning and sectorial strategies. This is where we have the synergies and the co-benefits. The third recommendation is to place affected stakeholders at the centre of the transition. So we all know inclusive stakeholder engagement is key to designing a just and equitable transition, but it's also something that's essential to building the social acceptance of the policies that need to take hold and the durability of those policies to remain. The fourth is to engage private sector from the beginning. So NDCs, they need to send stable signals to investors, backed by credible financing strategies and project pipelines, to make sure that those signals are what the private sector needs, what investors need to see, and also to help governments start to unlock the regulatory and policy barriers that are stopping finance flowing at scale. They need to have that private sector input upfront. Private sector needs to be coming and saying, these are the policies we need, or these are the policies we need to have shifted. The fifth is to optimise public finance and strengthen international support. So this means public budgets being aligned with NDC targets, access to climate finance to be simplified and technical assistance to be ramped up. And here we're talking about EMDs in particular. So, I ran through a lot there. The report, the big report is 300 pages, but there's a policy highlights, which is 30. So I recommend everyone, if you're interested, to have a look. There's some really good stats in there that can also help you in what you're doing, and speaking to other policymakers or other experts in the ecosystem. Thanks.
And I think, we also appreciate your collaboration on data, and we're really looking forward to joining the inclusive forum on carbon mitigation approaches. Well done. Yeah. Where hopefully we can kind of share some of what we're doing, and actually then think of through how do we combine kind of data tools and kind of data pools between our councils and thank you. Rich, so I'm going to turn to you now, and obviously we've heard about a bit around kind of what policy, the need for well-designed policies and kind of having them implemented. And I think one of the pillars was kind of effective stakeholder engagement. Is that okay? That a bit better. So yeah, I think we know that's not enough, and to secure public support for climate action, we need more participatory democracy. You're leading the Coalition for a Global Citizen Assembly, so if you can just talk us through the aims of the Assembly and how it would interact with existing international governance.
Sure. Can people hear that? Is that working, or should I hold it too? Hold it. Do the holding. Okay, great. So yeah, just quick background on me. So I started my career working as an IPCC researcher, and then I worked. I was actually at the same time that Ben was at the Sustainable Development Commission. I was deputy chair of something called ScienceWise, which is the UK kind of committee for looking at the relationship between like new tech and science and kind of people, kind of this, if you like, the science, the social construction of science deliberation processes. Anyway, so I've got a bit of skin in that game. I think so. Just the thing I wanted to kind of start talking about is, I don't know if people have noticed, but Brazil are really leading on this, on the multilateral reform opportunity, and to use it to echo the words of Anna Tony, the chief executive of COP30. We were meeting with her a few weeks ago, and she said, "Look, the situation we're in right now is that people are in the lead. Is that we are post-negotiation. People are having to take actions, and I've heard a lot of talk." Over the last few days in London Climate Week about how we're losing the argument on climate. Let me just say really clearly, we're not. I mean, the data, the public is robust, resilient, and definitive. We have 89% of people supporting ambitious climate action by governments, 72% of people globally supporting a rapid transition away from fossil fuels. The stats just go on and on. In the UK, we've seen a dip from 81% support to 69% support. When I was an advisor in the UK government on climate, we had between 35 and 45%. These are categorical, decisive, and stable majorities. We are winning the argument. But the big challenge is that things are not changing quickly enough. So we have a fundamental problem in our governance structures to be able to act on the public will. The public are not opposing this. And this has been a really interesting myth that I've been hearing time and time again, both here but also in various conferences over the last. I was in Bonn last week. They had said the same stories coming up. We just need to burst that bubble. It's simply not true. They absolutely might be winning some of the arguments in terms of the wider public discourse. So over the last, you may or may not be aware, and OECD's done some fantastic research on this through the deliberative wave report. So there's been this great movement over the last 10, 20 years of citizens' assemblies and deliberative processes, essentially the innovation around the governance chamber bit of politics, because on climate in particular, it's not delivering. There was a brilliant assembly done by the Stockholm Resilience Centre looking at the systemic. I mean, one of my favourite ever, actually. I thought it was fantastic, the work done in Sweden around that. So the Global Citizens Assembly was prototyped for COP26. It consists of 4 components: a core assembly, which is an accurate representation of the global population selected by lottery, which will deliberate between 30 and 50 hours. Community assemblies, which anyone can run anywhere. So there are, of course, millions of community groups around the world who are organizing on climate. Last week in Bonn, we launched the Assemblies platform to help people plug in, but we also just seeking to knit together existing activities with young people, indigenous communities, scientists, and other institutions into the process. We've got a 10-year process to try and build this new institution that will essentially provide that new parallel structure to the UNFCCC to ensure that people can be in the lead. And there's a fabulous report done by Ben's colleagues at E3G with Climate Analytics and the UN Foundation called The Value of Climate Cooperation. If you haven't read it, it came out in 2021. It's still an absolutely critical report that I regularly present at the start of my talks. And it maps out the global climate regime with science at the bottom, UNFCCC in the middle, and then the action agenda above that. But it does not include, and none of us were thinking to include it at the time, the community activities. But the community activities probably dwarf it all. They're probably bigger than all of the rest put together, and they provide a much more stable operating environment for business and governments than a lot of our political parties who are, we have to face the facts now, they are vulnerable to the takeover of populist interests which do not reflect the interest of the population. So what the Global Citizens Assembly is seeking to do is create infrastructure to be able to enable that stabilizing resilient structure to happen, but also provide a way of trying to create change based on, to come back to your original question, Ben, 5 criteria. So the first is trying to accelerate actions for institutions. But as anyone who's worked on multilateralism knows, that's difficult. That's the hard. It's much easier at a national or a local level, but at the multilateral level, it's difficult. You just have to acknowledge that. The second objective is to support citizens take action themselves within their communities, measured by self and collective efficacy. The third is combating polarization, building solidarity measured by bonding and bridging social capital. The third is tackling misinformation through learning using the Likert scale. And fifth is inclusion. Now, the reason we've got these, we're deliberately not adopting a method-specific approach because in different parts of the world, we need different assembly structures which are going to reflect the political conditions. Because one of the other key learnings we've had over the last decade is we have to be much more politically literate to ensure we can affect change. So in many ways, this project is simply a manifestation of the last 30 years of the democratic innovation movement globally that we're trying to knit together so that the whole can genuinely be greater than the sum of the parts.
Fantastic, thank you, Rich. Lots to digest there, and we'll make sure we have time for questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll do a 1 to 2 minute response for each of you on the national level, so a bit more of a national focus. So also with your chair of the Swedish Council hat, how do you translate the economic case that we've heard that is out there to get support from public and other stakeholders into policy advice that holds government to account? So the advice and the watchdog, how do you kind of pull it all together?
Yes, I think in the case of Sweden, we are lucky we have also other institutions around us because we are quite a small council with limited resources to do lots of economic modeling. So this evidence is again very useful. We have other institutions to do that, but I think essentially it's about pointing out the economic consequences of inaction. And this is not just, I think we hear this very loudly and clearly from the business community, actually directly, and that can be also, sometimes more effective than when scientists try to model this. But also, interestingly, what I think is compelling now in Sweden as an EU member state is that we are also losing EU various investment support opportunities if Sweden does not perform well enough on our policy targets. So that's another sort of economic incentive to take action within the EU family of member states. I want to shout out also, I think Ireland, the Irish Council are here, I believe, in London, and they did also a really interesting report on what is the cost of inaction. It was a collaboration with the Climate Council and I think their Fiscal Policy Council. So again, that's also an interesting, angle on this. How can you work with other experts and what are allies in driving climate action? Economic consequences of inaction, but then also co-benefits and synergies. Exactly what the OECD has now been doing. We have been doing that also in Sweden, talking about what are the, but we have framed it a bit differently, talking about synergies and trade-offs. Because I think, of course, as a policymaker, climate action is one of your concerns. You also have now security, building up a total defense, and many other priorities. So we try to use our mandate, which is actually quite broad. We look at the government's overall policy and the effects on climate targets. So it's not just climate policy. So now we are considering whether to look more deeply at these investments in total defense. Are there climate synergies there? We know there are some trade-offs that need to be managed, but that's another way to make that argument.
Yeah, there's a big another challenge in Europe: the significant increase in GDP on defence. Steph, I kind of wanted to touch on the OECD's work on mission governance. And if you could quickly kind of explain the concept and then really any kind of particular recommendations or gaps that we as the governance community should be aware of.
Just get the mic. Sure. Yeah. I think just reflecting on what everyone's been saying on the panel, I also think we're sort of at this interesting juncture now where at the OECD, we've been advising on what governments need to do on policy for a long time. So in different stages. So one of the projects that I lead is this, the horizontal, it's called, well, it's a long name. OECD's terrible at names, but Building Climate and Economic Resilience. And it used to be Building Climate and Economic Resilience in a Changing World, because when it started, it was right before COVID or COVID had just hit, and right before the war in Ukraine. So we were starting to look at what is climate policy in the face of all of these sort of disruptions, and how do we stay the course, and how do we build resilience, not in terms of adaptation, but also resilience into our policy. And then we shifted. So then that was the first phase. The second phase was then on, okay, we're in this short window of opportunity. We have 5 years. What do we really need to drill down on and focus on policy-wise over these 5 years to make it happen? And now I'm actually thinking through what what's the next phase? What is this next phase? And I think the uncharted territory, it is charted by people who have been in this space for a long time, but in these bigger policy discussions is how is these policy being made? What is the mindset that is in the room when these policies are being made? And looking at almost not fully at the individual level, because we don't have time to do that, but across these governments and policymakers and all the ecosystem that feeds into this, what's the kind of mindset that we're bringing into the room, and are we able to really think through it with a systems approach, how all of these things actually interconnect? And it's not easy, but there are skills out there that can actually do this. And one of the main barriers when we're talking about mission governance, one of the main barriers to implementing that by governments that get cited is personal capacity to actually implement it. So what is mission governance? In effect, this is a framework that challenges us to think beyond incrementalism. So it encourages thinking beyond a siloed approach to dealing with climate policy and embracing governance innovation as part of as a big priority. So if you have a mission, we're talking about a clearly defined overarching policy objective that's aimed at tackling a societal challenge within a specified time frame. So you can see that climate policy and NDCs fit squarely within that. Now we found the OECD did an assessment of, sorry, let me get this right. Across 15 countries, they reviewed the assessments of climate councils against a set of mission governance principles. And they found that when these mission governance type approaches are being incorporated, it's mainly siloed to the science, technology, and innovation compartments or domains, but not necessarily spreading out into the climate policy sphere. And while they often focus on lowering emissions, they're often disconnected from these broader objectives. So it's another report with another bunch of recommendations. There's 6 key ones. I'm not going to go through them all now, and a lot are very similar to actually what I mentioned with NDCs about this horizontal whole of government action. A lot about a strong focus on societal engagement, citizen engagement, different types of participatory mechanisms to get the full ecosystem in the room. And another one of the key recommendations I did want to focus on a little bit more is about bridging innovation. And I think that here we need to make sure that these new innovation measures that support how policies are being made, to make sure we're actually getting the right kind of policies that we need in today's world, which is constantly changing and those disruptions haven't stopped, is to have the mandates, the resources, and the legitimacy. And that's also about using the language, talking about systems change and building that in. Sorry, I probably went over the 2 minutes.
No, that's fine. I was just going to add, I've read the report, it's excellent, and I think there's a lot around the need for piloting and experimentation and kind of whether councils play that role or other institutions within the governance framework. So I think that's a challenge for us all to think about. Rich, I think I was going to turn to you and kind of from your experience really at a national level, where the kind of failings are in the participatory democracy and kind of any kind of key things you'd like to see changed so it works better at a national level.
So it's kind of hard to talk about that from a global perspective because the picture is super mixed. But so look, fundamentally, we have to start from the start, acknowledge that the bridge between the governed, the people and the government is broken. And I know we all know that, but we just have to start from that acknowledgement. And whether it's AI or digital or the failure of what was once called the fourth estate to play that mediating role. If we think of in the UK, for example, the BBC was set up post-universal suffrage because people in Whitehall were scared that if you give everyone the vote, we're going to get crazy decisions. And then in many ways, there's a whole suite of things you need to think about in terms of kind of where we are right now. I think in terms of how it's shifting this participatory landscape, I think the big shift is away from. So at the start of my career, we were obsessed about getting mandates from senior politicians, etc. And sometimes, I think we saw in particular with the French National Climate Assembly, Macron said he was going to implement it no filter. Of course, he never was, but they have implemented, at current speaking, 56% of the recommendations. I know in France it's often seen as not as a success in the public, but 56%, it's extraordinary. I mean, who is, as a kind of like campaign, it wouldn't take that kind of result. I think, but I think when this whole point of in the current conditions we are, whereby demand is increasing for like government action, be it in terms of like social care, be it in terms of climate action, be it in terms of the need for resilience, and costs are both increasing but also getting spent on things like defense, etc. We need to really shift the way we think about all of these structures away from like creating this idea of the enabling state. Now, the idea of enabling state is a very old idea, but it is about creating these. So I was giving a talk to a local council in the UK about a year from now, and a community wanted to organise a citizens' assembly. And the leader of the council, who was a Green candidate, she came up to me and said, "Look, Rich, it's a good idea, but actually I'm never going to be able to get some of the Conservatives in my cabinet to agree to it." And I said to her, look what they're interested in. They're interested in replacing the bollards, building new park infrastructure, community agriculture, land commoning, all these kind of stuff. I said, are you going to fund any of that, even if when Starmer comes in, he doubles your budget, which you know is the opposite is happening. The budget is going to be reduced. Now, she said, no, I'm not. I said, no, that's right. You just need to create the conditions for the people to be able to lead. And if they're doing things that you can support, either with money or with permission or with premises that you want to offload now because you can't afford to run them anymore. And we are absolutely seeing the need for that relationship between the acknowledging the power that we've all got to be able to affect change. And I think there's one of the things that has happened sadly in the last 20 years is the ability of, and it's not the case in Scandinavia, it's really not, but it is the case in many global north countries, is 20 years ago we were quite good at supporting communities, do asset transfer and build that listening capability and support people to action. A lot of that has gone, and we need to rebuild those capabilities for communities to be able to lead. Of course, the citizens' assemblies is part of that, but it's a wider structural reorientation between the state and the people.
Fantastic. No, thank you. We were talking yesterday around community ownership, for example, of kind of energy projects and how that can actually, make it more real and make them benefit directly. Okay, we have 10 minutes or so for questions. So we'll go straight in. Could someone, Juan, would you mind going with the microphone? Thank you so much. So the gentleman there, please.
Good afternoon. Ivan Compass here from King's College London. First of all, I'd like to thank you to the chair and the panelists for the insightful discussion about policy and public support for climate action. I'd just like to ask, in the era of where prices are volatile, cost of living crisis is still raging, but then I think the panel said there's by meeting NDCs, it could help grow the economy. However, what is the problem in for politicians and policymakers for meeting climate NDCs as part of long-term goals? Is it more of because policymakers are more interested in short-term issues like the cost of living crisis, or is it more of other political motives such as chasing votes or something? And second, the last question is how important should policymakers emphasize on climate action as part of their economic goals and also political campaigns? Thank you.
Does anyone want to kick off? I think one reflection I would have is, what part of the Climate Council's role is, I think, to kind of show that long-termism and show that the benefits kind of begin now and they get greater, and the disbenefits get greater the longer you leave action. But I'll hand over to Ussa. Do you want to come in?
No. Can you hear me now? This is better. Yes. I think this is, a question for a political strategist in a way, but I just want to maybe share a bit of sympathy with politicians at this time, because we are very close again to these 2030 targets that many councils are very focused on and tracking progress towards. It was of course relatively easier for a politician, a policymaker 5 or 10 years ago to set the targets for 2030. They, would they still be in office? They did not have to balance the budget in light of that climate target. So I do think, I mean, as a climate council, we expect a lot from the political system in delivering on the targets, but I think it's more of a collective effort as well to indeed, as you said, also identifying the short-term wins of climate action within the near term, really. So it's now we are kind of witnessing the whole intention of climate laws, climate targets, having this timetable, but we are also getting closer to the finish line, and that's when it gets more difficult.
Thank you. Lady here.
Thank you. Hello? Hello?
Yeah. It's working.
Oh, you can hear me. Oh, sorry. I thought it was too soft. Hi, I'm Sonia Shah from the National Audit Office. One thing in this discussion, which I've not heard from any of you at the moment, but you guys are touching on the gaps of this, is the role of how both private sector and public sector now need to report along their pathways. The key discussions around this week have also been through the ISSB coming on the table, talking about transition plans. And a lot of that narrative needs to be brought on paper to actually show where they are, because the NDCs are at the moment a lot of assumptions and methodologies resulting in over ambitious plans and understating risk as well, right? So there's a very key role to be played here through what organizations now need to transparently report and make sure that's accurate through the ISSB process as well. But also with the fact that how public sector, through the IPSASB coming up with its initial paper around this, but UK also being the first country to ask public sector to start to disclose. And I do see the role of policy coming in through that avenue as well, when companies try to say, we need to do X, Y, Z, but we also need the right policies as well. And thirdly, you mentioned science, and science is moving a lot more faster than some of these mandatory disclosures coming on the table, right? So we're seeing 1.5 beyond, getting beyond, well, possibly beyond, but also carbon budgets are now expiring the next 2 to 3 years as well, right? So the narrative and push for that, the pace of mandating that is not as fast as some of the issues we're discussing here. So where's the voice coming on that to bring that transparency and disclosures on the table at a very rapid rate?
So full transparency, this is not my expert subject. E3G does host another network, the International Transition Plan Network, which brings together policymakers and private sector to think about these issues. And I know that they do a great deal of work trying to connect government policy with the disclosures and the transition plans of the sector. I don't know if anyone, Steph?
I'll come in a bit. Yeah, it's a really, obviously, the transition planning ecosystem is a key part of this, but we can't talk about everything in 1 hour, unfortunately, but there's so many elements. This is why it's not easy, and that goes to the first question. What we're asking of governments to do is not easy. It's transformational change. Yeah. It's not like there are other areas of policy that require transformational change, but we need to remember that, and they have to do it fast. So this is a difficult situation, and I'm a former environmental lawyer. Valuing the environment doesn't match with political cycles and electoral cycles in many countries as well. So there's this issue that's been around for years. But just on the transition plan aspect, I wanted to say two things and I've forgotten the first thing. But this connection between the public and private sector is really important. Oh, that's right. Policy and regulation, it is happening. So there's one example I want to talk about, which is the OECD Guidelines for Responsible Business Conduct for M&Es. You may be aware of it, but it's a legal instrument that OECD member countries, all member countries, have signed up to and adhere to and have committed to actually implement in their country. So that includes recommendations around integrity and credible transition planning, and it's been enshrined into law into a number of countries, including the EU. So this is happening. And that approach, obviously, that's evidence of the benefits of multilateralism in the sense that it requires the same approach, the same fundamental principles to trickle down. So there is an example there. But the connection between the public and private sector on transition planning is really important, because I think on the policy side, and I started to talk about this a little bit, the private sector, they are putting down these transition plans, but often they cannot reach what they're saying they can because the policy isn't there. But they know what policies they need. So where is this feedback loop? And this is part of the systems change. This is something that I would love us to work on more, actually, and hopefully with others in the room. But it's this systems change feedback loops that we need to fortify.
Yeah, just a quick response, Sonia, to make sure I may or may not have understood it properly. But if we zoom out, I mean, the point originally when we think about how government's supposed to work is the media and the public are supposed to hold government and our wider institutions to account. That's kind of how it's supposed to work. And of course, it's kind of like it's broken. So part of the reason the IPCC and the UNFCCC have been supporting the Global Citizens Assembly is because they're really hoping to create new mechanisms to enable people around the world to hold their governments to account on the NDCs. And what we're in our next iteration going to 2026, we're really hoping to be able to feed into the global stocktake process. So that's definitely a core element of what we want to achieve. But let's not pretend it's easy. Let's not pretend getting that level of engagement and creating that accountability in a world whereby media and attention is so diffuse. It is harder, I think, to do these. We just have to acknowledge that. Speaking to Stephanie's point on systems change, I've just come from a meeting talking about how do we get governance systems change. And I think one of the big challenges for people like me, so I don't know if people are familiar with the kind of 3 horizons model. You kind of government as usual, the emerging governance we need, which is kind of, I think, what you're speaking to, and the innovation cycle, which enables a transition. The truth is, a lot of the projects that I've done over the last 20 years have actually provided, in a way, forms of legitimacy to institutions which can't do what you want them to do anymore in the current environment. And I think that we, who are part of the wider governance innovation space, need to get really honest with ourselves, saying, are we providing the new emerging system to emerge, or are we providing a kind of fig leaf of legitimacy to a system that actually we need to support decline? We need to hospice, I think, many of our institutions and many of our frameworks, because they're not going to be able to cope in the current very different media environment. And so I think that's a really important conversation, I think, in terms of where we put our energy.
Thank you. We had a lady at the back, and then we've probably got time for one more question, I'm afraid. But we will be around in the coffee break if you want to ask us directly as well.
Hi, thank you. It's been such a fantastic panel so far. And this question, I'm Anna Murphy from S-Curve Economics. We're a non-profit think tank. This question is probably most targeted, or I'm most curious on Rich's perspective. And it's really, I get your point about this statistic of 89% of people are in favor of climate action. But I think we really need to elaborate on what trade-offs are they willing to make, or who do they expect to pay for it? Do they want taxes on the wealthy? Are people on the whole willing to pay more tax? Are they happy for the government to go into more debt, or are they happy for us not to spend more in defense, for example? And I'm really curious on the data on that, or if you're engaging with the public on that next level of analysis. Thanks.
So thanks, Anne. I mean, basically, that's precisely right. I mean, fundamentally, the reason we need to have these citizens' assembly processes is because they're really good at supporting those conversations that you're talking about. And there's specific kinds of data in specific parts of the world in terms of answering those questions. I think but it really depends on how it's done. So, for example, in terms of this conversation on the science, so we've noticed that unless you are informing the assemblies with systemically informed data, like, for example, the Stockholm Resilience Centre brilliantly produces, and unless you're facilitating the conversation in a way which supports people who have polar opposite opinions. So, for example, some of my favourite processes I've been involved with, where you have like climate activists, talking to people who are worried about losing their jobs in old industries and legacy industries, but recognizing the legitimacy of both positions. One person cares about their grandchildren's and futures. The other person wants to have jobs and work for their children or their family that is going to be morally appropriate. And I think when you support I think one of the mistakes we've made in this space historically is trying to create consensus. I don't think it's about consensus. It's about creating the conditions to be able to understand the legitimacy of our positions, and under that situation we're often able to create environments where we can look at, okay, well, are you prepared to take on more debt? Are you prepared to pay more taxation, etc.? And I think that's what I think when they work brilliantly well, these processes, is when we can dissolve the polarity and polarizing tendencies which stop us being able to progress.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Anna. I think we have unfortunately run out of time, but I'd just like to thank all of our panelists today who brought their different expertise. I hope you found it a rich discussion. I'm sure they won't mind if you tap them on the shoulder over a cup of coffee. But before we go for coffee, we've got a really exciting fireside chat. There is no actual fireplace, I'm sorry to say, but it is still going to be a great chat. So I'll hand back over to Carla, who will introduce the next part.
Thanks to Ben and the panel discussion, and also for all of your thoughtful and provocative questions. We're going to move into a fireside chat, and I'm delighted to have with us Charlotte Scadden, the Senior Advisor for Information Integrity from the United Nations. Charlotte has been on a bit of a whirlwind tour talking about this challenge. This is her 4th country this week. So Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us. We made this connection through some discussions that we were having in Brazil around the challenge of information integrity, and we persuaded you that this would be a fantastic audience for you to come and engage. You work across the board in terms of the disinformation challenge at the global level and across a whole range of issues, but one of your priority areas is around the intersection with the UN's priority on climate action. So we are really delighted to have you with us and to learn more about your thinking and your activities. And I'm also pleased to introduce Ellen Lurum Bosan, who has recently left the Swedish Climate Policy Council and is a professor of political science at the University of Oslo, who will be leading and facilitating the conversation with Charlotte for the next few minutes. So welcome both of you to the stage.
Thank you. Does it work? No? That was easy. Okay, so I've never participated in a fireside chat without the fire or even with the fire, but let's see.
Yeah. I don't know if is this working? Yeah.
Good. Okay, then we're all good. Okay, so we have had a discussion now about the challenges of bridging science and policy that's already challenging. And then you come along and you work with information integrity, maybe making it even harder. So what's your answer to how can misinformation, disinformation make it more challenging to bridge this science policy divide?
Well, thanks. And thanks for having me and for that introduction. I think it's been about nearly 10 days in 4 countries, so it's not quite a week, but still. But I think it's been interesting for me to actually hear this discussion about the science policy gap and bridge. I think, the challenge of climate information integrity, addressing risks to information integrity around climate-related information, is something that, we very clearly see requires a multi-stakeholder approach. And that includes policymakers, it includes scientists, it includes many different groups, actually. And, our approach to this, actually to the information integrity space more broadly, is to build coalitions, right? And that's precisely what we've been doing around the climate space, particularly in the lead up to COP30. We look at information integrity, we take a very holistic approach, and we look at it at what we describe as a systems level. And I'm happy, obviously, today to delve in a little bit and try in the very short time we have to explain our approach to the information ecosystem and how to improve it.
Thank you. So you've been traveling around and you've had several high-level events in different cities around Europe. So maybe you can inform this audience about what you have concluded and what the initiatives from the UN are
in this area? So I'll touch on just 2 related initiatives and how we've been addressing those in the various cities that I've been in. So the first is the UN Global Principles for Information Integrity. These were launched actually a year ago this week. It was just our anniversary by the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. And really, this actually reflected his, but also UN leadership and countries more broadly and others' concern about what was happening in the information ecosystem and how it was undermining pretty much every aspect of the UN's work. So the Secretary General kind of gave us the task of coming up with this framework for action, which we did, and that was what became the Global Principles. And it's a set of recommendations based around these 5 principles. They are societal trust and resilience, which looks at really kind of the core of how to establish trust in societies through some regulatory measures, but also trust and safety in the digital space, for instance. They are healthy incentives, which is really looking at the business model, particularly in the digital space and the role of advertisers in the private sector. The monetization of disinformation and hate, which for us is a huge challenge. Public empowerment, which is looking at how we can try and redress a little bit some of the power imbalance in the information ecosystem, particularly through empowering individuals a bit more. You know, everyone whose data is being sold and they're not in control of what's happening or even aware of it half the time. Independent, free and pluralistic media, which is absolutely key, and another really important stakeholder group, right, that we absolutely have to engage, because we're not going to be able to win any of you know, the efforts that we're making on any of these issues without that engaged media. And then transparency in research, right? Because we absolutely need to know what's going on in the information ecosystem so that we can effectively address it. And there are so many challenges on that front. So, you know, we see information integrity as a pluralistic information space where people can get the information they need safely and effectively, free from discrimination and hate, where they can access reliable information, enjoy freedom of expression, and where they are not, you know, faced with disinformation and hate, which is, you know, makes it impossible really to be able to make informed decisions. Where it comes to climate, we launched in November with the government of Brazil, who, by the way, have not just been leaders in the climate space, but in the information integrity space too. And our colleagues at UNESCO, the Global Initiative for Information Integrity on Climate Change. So this really has 3 main objectives, broad objectives. Firstly, strengthen research so that we understand what's happening around climate information better, especially in certain parts of the world. There is a huge disparity in research outside of certain global north countries. It's really a handful of countries where there's been research into what's happening. And in the research is very much focused in English. So we want to address that. We also want to look at best practice and, you know, action, really evidence-based action for how we can improve the information ecosystem and access to climate-related information. And then finally, we've been looking at how we can integrate information integrity into the COP process ahead of COP30. And the really great news on that front was that just ahead of the Bonn talks, we heard that information integrity had been added to, for the first time ever, to the action agenda, the COP action agenda, which is obviously really huge news for us. So they're the kind of 2 main ways in which we've been kind of bringing the information integrity and climate space together.
Thank you. So I have worked a lot with climate governance over many years, but I've not worked so much with information integrity. And you repeat the information integrity space. It's not obvious for me what that means. Can you specify? Is that kind of, what do you mean with that?
Yeah, sure. And, you know, and that's a fair point, because, you know, when we launched the Global Principles a year ago, the concept of information integrity was, you know, I would say it was new, and it didn't necessarily have massive buy-in. But, you know, by September, UN member states, 193 member states of the UN, had included an entire section on information integrity in the Global Digital Compact that they adopted as part of the Pact for the Future, which was a landmark, resolution at the UN. And and you asked me actually, and I didn't answer about the cities I've been in. So, I started in Cannes at Cannes Lion. So I know no one's going to feel sorry for me for being in Cannes at the huge advertising glamorous festival. But that was very interesting there to have those conversations with advertisers who were really trying to engage in this. And, they are the ones that are funding the digital information ecosystem that is amplifying so much of the disinformation and other risks that we see. And then I was in Bonn, and then I was at Oslo at the Internet Governance Forum, where I saw information integrity pretty much, everywhere. I mean, in so many events. What I heard in all those different spaces was a common concern about the lack of trust in the information ecosystem and a common willingness to look for solutions. Now, of course, the advertisers are coming at it from a very different place. They're worried about their bottom line. But, I don't really care so long as we're all working together to get to where we want to be, which is, a sustainable future with peaceful societies where people can access the information they need. So with information integrity, we're obviously dealing with a risk, what we see as a risk landscape. And we go into this work with our eyes wide open because the challenge is formidable and the threats in the information space are vast. I mean, we kind of separate them out for our own thinking into those threats which are proliferating at scale. So misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, hate speech, harassment, other risks which we're seeing amplified in digital spaces, but also offline. We then see the kind of more structural political risks, right? So that could be censorship, suppression of the media, removal of information sources, that kind of information isolation, those kind of broader attempts to really limit what information is available. And then underlying that, and I think, a previous speaker touched on this, is the underlying risks we see from emerging tech, including generative AI. And that is something we're really worried about, not just because of the potential for spreading mis and disinformation, but the wider societal implications, because the tech companies and AI actors are rolling out these tools. They're integrating them into our daily lives without us even really realizing the extent to which it's happening at breakneck speed. They are not slowing down. They made a lot of noises about safety and, at the beginning, but now that's kind of seems to have gone out the window because they feel they have political license to do so. People are now becoming accustomed to using these tools, and they are shaping people's understanding of the world and what's happening in it. But the really worrying trend for us is that it's impacting trust at a very basic level because people don't know what is real and they don't know what to believe anymore. And so it's making them question every information source. So the way we see it, we are guinea pigs in an information experiment that is really testing the resilience of our societies. And I don't know that we're going to pass that test necessarily.
So this is bleak. We thought it was
no. I've got a lot of solutions. Don't worry.
Okay, good. Because we have tried to be positive in other events earlier today about climate.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. The UN person comes in and just paints a really negative picture. I'm sorry, it's not really.
So let's focus on. I guess you maybe have different advice for different kind of actors. You speak to media actors, you speak to people in general, and what's the role of policymakers and governments?
Well, I mean, it's massive, obviously, and first of all, let me just say that I do, not to continue to be negative, but allow me for a moment, I do want to touch on what we do know about what's happening in the risk space, because that really helps to inform what we can do. And there is a lot we can do, and I have many concrete suggestions on that front. But, whilst there is this dearth of research, we do have some limited research. And when it comes to climate, what's really interesting is that the risks and behaviors and tactics that we see are kind of twofold, right? There's the more kind of traditional efforts to just undermine climate action for reasons that we all know. But then there's also climate change being used as a wedge issue. So, to really polarize and disrupt societies, especially around elections, and especially at pivotal societal moments. And that's happening from a range of actors, actually, those seeking, just to create chaos in certain situations, state actors and others. And generally these behaviors and tactics, I mean, there are various narratives. I won't go into them all, but they seek to discredit science. They seek to discredit consensus. There are attacks on individual scientists, but also disinformation researchers and others. We're really concerned about about academic freedom and the ability of scientists and others to and researchers to carry out their work, because especially over the last few months, that's really become a lot more difficult for them. There is what we see as a use of experts, right? And I'm sure you've all seen it. These experts that are there to deny climate science and see themselves as defenders of the people. That's very much a thread. And then there's also the discrediting of multilateral processes. So it's not just the science; it's the UN, it's COP, but it's really any organization that's seen as an elite and part of this kind of global elite conspiracy. And we've even seen, attempts to paint us as global elitists who are controlling the weather. And sometimes when I say that, people laugh. But the thing is, that is coming from mainstream political figures in very, in a lot of places, including the country where I live, which is the US. So, we see a redirection of people from what we've considered to be mainstream spaces into these niche, localized information spaces, community driven often. But that's a really useful finding for us because one of the solutions is that we need to shift our thinking about the information environment. And someone earlier on referenced the mainstream media. The mainstream is not what it was 5 years ago, and it is certainly not what a lot of institutions still think it is. It is, in fact, these very polarized and different spaces. We need to be in those, right? I mean, they have these experts, but what about us? We actually have real expertise. We need to be trying to get into all these spaces so that we can make our voice heard there. But that's going to take a shift in thinking to understand that the way people get their information and the way they interact in the information environment has entirely changed, and it's going to continue to change. We have to identify information voids, and there are so many of them. And we have to fill them very quickly and repeatedly, because if we don't fill information voids, the disinformation actors do. And they'll do it without hesitation and very fast. And they're very good at it. We've seen them do it again and again, not just around climate, but other things. And underlying a lot of those tactics that I mentioned are what we see as the kind of us versus them adversarial narrative, right? It's creating this idea that there's an other, that there's an elite, and that could be different in different countries, but it's there to serve its own interests and to really take advantage of the more vulnerable and marginalized. So we have to be extremely aware of this and very careful in our tone and language that we're not reinforcing that. And there's many things we do, to be honest, that do reinforce it. I always mention our use of acronyms, but, and it sounds like a really, silly thing, but it's actually a tool used by disinformation actors to show that we're speaking another language that's exclusive, exclusionary. And then we come along and just reinforce that very narrative. So we need to go about this with humility and respect. We need to very carefully listen. And we talk about community engagement, and somebody before mentioned face-to-face interactions. I cannot stress how important it is. The online, offline pollination of cross-pollination of information and disinformation is so key. We need to be in those communities, listening to people and talking at really the community level, because that's what people understand. They understand the problem and solutions at community level in a way that they can deal with, and it's going to impact them. Sorry, I know I'm going on, but I just do want to make sure that, I do talk about solutions, because genuinely listening to those criticisms and concerns is key. And we have a tendency, I'm talking about the international community, to be a bit defensive, right? So we need to be open to those concerns and be transparent and acknowledge them and acknowledge, the way people feel. So they're just a few small things that we can do. But we can't do it alone. And one thing that's become really clear, and I'll end here, is just to say that, we absolutely have to bring in and expand the range of stakeholders that we're working with. That's policymakers, that's the media, that's advertisers, it's everyone, because it's going to take us all working together to address this.
Thank you. I think I will push you a little bit more to be specific. I guess in the audience we have different types of people doing different kinds of work relating to climate. But if you talk to the policymakers, the bureaucrats, or the politicians that are here, what should those do? Because maybe you hadn't thought that much about it before, or I don't know. When you go home tomorrow, how should they change their practice?
Well, I think thinking about it is the first step, and understanding and being aware and acknowledging that we are not going to be able to, and I truly believe this, we are not going to be able to achieve our commonly agreed goals around climate unless we address what's happening in the information ecosystem. And I think having that awareness and bringing information integrity and the focus on the information space into your core planning, right, and relating it to all the other work you do is going to be key. And the other thing is, by the way, that we know that a lot of these behaviors and tactics that I just mentioned, they're not necessarily aimed at the public. There's increasing evidence that they are aimed very specifically at policymakers. And actually, I saw a presentation in Bonn that had some new evidence of, in fact, two that had new evidence around exactly how different groups are targeting different policymakers. The 89% campaign, I think, that was referenced earlier was really important to my mind because, it's a good mitigation measure against what we call astroturfing, which I'm sure is something you're all familiar with. But if not, it's the tactic used to make decision makers and policymakers believe there's public opposition to something when there is not. And this can happen by inauthentic means, including in the digital space, or by, even kind of fabricated offline protests, whatever. But it gives the policymakers then license and, justification for not pursuing the kind of climate action that publics really do want. So we supported that campaign and I loved it. But I think that is something I think policymakers need to bear in mind, right? We're all being manipulated and we're all being influenced. And it's really important to have a really clear-eyed understanding of what's happening in the space so that all of us, those decision makers included, can make decisions based on actual reliable information, right?
Thank you. So what about those of us who are scientists? Because we love to discuss, right? And disagreement is the core of the scientific practice. And in a way, what you're saying, that it's not... Should we be more careful? Some kind of disagreement is not as productive, or what would be the recommendations to scientists?
Disagreement is fine, but it's being able to explain what's behind the disagreement, that disagreement is part of the scientific process, right? And being transparent about it and putting it in terms, again, that people understand. That's what's absolutely key. And I think we really need to support scientists. In traveling around the world and hearing from various scientists, there's a genuine sense of fear that I hear, especially from women scientists who, are being targeted and attacked. And we know this is a very effective strategy of disinformation actors and hate actors, right? To go after individuals. So it's really important to stick together, absolutely, and to support each other. But, this isn't about censoring any opinion or saying that we all have to, be in agreement on every single thing. No. Disagreement is kind of at the core of what you do, right? But it's also something that we need to then be able to explain, right? And we need to not assume that others understand why you're disagreeing, and put it in ways that people can really, really, really get, in their everyday lives, I would say.
Yeah, so we're struggling with getting communicate in a way that people can understand already, but and
if I could just say one thing. So I've worked at the UN for nearly 19 years, and I've worked on a lot of different issues. I am not a climate person per se, but I've put my time in the climate space just like any other good UN official. I think I have a really good grasp of UN processes and UN language. But I tell you something, trying to get my head around COP and the language around COP and being in rooms with, my wonderful climate colleagues and allies, I'm frankly lost half the time, and that's me. So if I'm a little bit lost and I feel like this is a language that I don't even understand, how is anyone else going to be able to penetrate it, right? So I think, we have to have some self-awareness and ask some tough questions of ourselves about, what more we can do, because we need to take back the driver's seat a little bit here, right? We need to regain control. We know that we're up against a huge, very well-funded, adversarial actor group. But I think, there are some kind of basic steps that we can all take. It's just having that awareness and recognition about it in everything we do.
Thank you very much. So there's a lot of people here from climate councils. So now and I don't think we've discussed this so much in the climate council space. So I think we got a lot of good advice from you that we can bring into our discussions. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Charlotte and Ellen. That was an illuminating and fascinating discussion, and a lot of really good food for thought for us to all take away, and also a great reminder that we do need to speak in plain English or whatever language you are communicating in, and avoid those acronyms that sneak in. We are going to take a break for about the next 15 minutes, and then we will all be coming back into the plenary. So do grab yourself another coffee, cup of tea, have a chat with someone you haven't spoken to, and we'll come back for a final panel. And we have a speaker from the COP30 team to close. Thank you. Hi everyone. Welcome back, and I hope you had fantastic sessions wherever you were. I'm pleased to introduce the last panel discussion to kind of bring it all back together, and with Nick Mabey, CEO of E3G, the panel will be talking about towards a whole of governance approach to climate, and really how the ecosystem of actors need to work together, and also bringing in some reflections from the session. So over to you, Nick.
Hello, everybody. This is actually true that I'm really sorry because I have to run around being London Climate Action Week at events. I missed this because this is actually my favourite event of the whole London Climate Action Week. But don't tell anybody because I'm not allowed to have favourites. But it's both me and Carla's favourite, actually. Because for me, this is just at the heart of everything we're trying to do. And what we're going to do is to kind of wrap up the day and talk through the different roundtables. But I thought just to give you a bit of context, just to relevant. So I just came from a roundtable with the COP President Designate, Ambassador Delago, and a lot of very notable people talking about how to land the COP. And not breaking any confidences, because I'm not. There was a lot of discussion about how to set up international processes and a process going forward to make sure that the transition was seen as investable, and that was there were processes to make sure confidence could be built, etc. And then said, we really need to make sure that all the promises people make, they're accountable for. And so we've got a process for accountability. They said, but we've got to engage the public, and we've got to bring them on board, and we've got to have processes where you can engage. And then finally, at the end, after we had a little bit of discussion about the word climate, and the bit of scientific input of not the nicest kind, it was, and we better make sure that we know how to respond if the science turns out to be a lot worse than we thought, and actually we need to pivot and manage risks and in a very different way, and we need to be flexible and have some kind of process going forward. And I was kind of sitting there going, governance, because no one used the words. And the fact is, it's lovely to have that all at COP, but if that's not embedded all the way down, and as we all know, governance is just kind of institutionalized, fossilized politics and social contracts and everything. And all the things they do up there to get to agreement have to turn into that all different levels. So everything you've been discussing, because I do know what the agenda is exactly on point, but actually in a way more on point, because nothing that's agreed at COP30, all those things they've just talked about, will make any difference unless that runs into national and regional and other pieces of governance. So I thought you'd like to realize that they're all depending on you, so no pressure. And of course, the reason why we did this event was we wanted to bring all the different pieces of the puzzle together and think about it in a kind of whole holistic way, look at the outcomes of governance, not just the instruments of governance, how they fit together, how they're phased, how they move. That's a long-term process, or it's a medium-term process we need to move through. So we're going to go through each of the panels. I don't know if you have a particular way forward, but I'll start with Wendy, who's you want school play gets preference. Laura, you please give us a 3 to 4 minute outline of the round table, and then we'll turn to a conversation after we've done all of you.
Great. So I'm Laura Clark, so I am sitting in the right place. And do I need to turn this? Does that work? Ah, there we are. Turn it on. That helps. So we had a really good conversation exactly about governance and essentially how do you close the gap between international commitments at the at the international level, pledges, NDCs, and the real world action that is needed to actually bend the curve of emissions and build the future we need. And the big thing that we are focused on at Client Earth, together with Globe Legislators International and WWF International, is about how do we get a next generation of national climate laws. And national climate laws are critically important because they really help you deliver an all of economy, all of government action plan for delivering those changes. They provide certainty for businesses. They are investable. The UK, which has of course got the sort of standout Climate Change Act, last year it grew its net zero economy by 10%. So 3 times faster than the rest of the economy. And that's in part because of that legal clarity provided by a national climate law. So they're really important also, I think, in terms of providing that long-term thinking and insulating climate action from political winds and political fashions, because if you have those legal foundations in place, that provides that long-term certainty and a little bit of insulation against that short-term thinking that is so prevalent in our politics, particularly right now. They would also, I would say, I talked about the investability point, Nick. They also actually provide a framing for transparency for the public and therefore public participation and engagement, but also critically accountability. So at Client Earth, we've brought 2 cases against the UK government and 1 twice on the basis of the UK Climate Change Act, essentially saying that the net zero strategy was not fit for purpose. So, that's a plug for national climate laws to really close that gap between international commitment and real world action. And if I can say one other thing, then looking at the corporate sector, mandatory transition plans, we think are absolutely key, and they are, they really help you walk the talk in terms of what you're doing as a business in terms of the net zero transition. And at Client Earth, we released a legal opinion earlier this week, essentially saying that transition plans are friend, not foe, because they help you do the work properly. They therefore help you manage climate risk and the extent to which you are exposed to climate risk, and they also protect against legal liability. So and then of course the next day, Ed Miliband announced a consultation on mandatory corporate transition plans. So that's, for me, those are 2 really key things in how you actually wire in the action that's needed: national climate laws and corporate transition plans.
Great, I can feel the KPIs being written on your grants at the moment. Wendy.
Yes, is that okay? That's working. Yes. Thanks, Nick. And Laura, that sounds terrific. So our session was corporate planning for responsible policy engagement, and I think we underscore bold, capital responsible policy engagement, because it hasn't historically always been responsible, and it's still not always responsible. So the role of corporates, and we had a terrific panel from a corporate from Unilever, which I am told scored the highest ever mark in the Influence Mapper scoring on their sustainability. So well done, Unilever. And from the investor perspective, Church of England Pensions Board, thank you, Lara. And then from a council representative from a fairly new council, the Netherlands Scientific Council. And we had a really interesting conversation, sort of looking at a couple of questions on what do corporates need from the policy space in terms of sectoral pathways and targets, but also how can corporates advocate to governments? Any positive examples? And you know what? I don't think there was one. So perhaps we just ran out of time. But underscore again the point on responsibility, and in wrapping up that section, I had the privilege of sitting next to Arturo from the Hero Amazonia, and I can't see him in the room, But he raised the question, which I cleared with Carla before I say it publicly, why can't the indigenous peoples in the Amazon create a climate council and become a member of the ICCN? And then we had a bit of a conversation. If climate councils, as they do, can transcend political cycle, why can't they also transcend societal and political boundaries? So looking at the interests of groups of peoples, of stakeholders at the real economy, at local communities, but look at those sort of cross-stakeholder interests and approaches. And that was a little bit hijacking the corporate session, but when we get to a land use transition, and I used something that Jim Ski had said at one of the COPs, and I didn't attribute it to him, so I should have, when he said to us, if you think energy transition was difficult, we haven't even begun on land use transition. And that's the one that's going to be really, really difficult. And remember, the theme of this COP is people, economy, nature. And that is the intersect where this land use transition sits. And if we don't, within the corporate community, within the business community, bring along local communities, voters, stakeholders affected, the most vulnerable globally, but also within our own community, we are not going to transition. And I think the councils are the perfect place to have those conversations within countries, but also bilaterally, plurilaterally, multilaterally. And I'm really excited by this. And Nick and Carla, this has been a thrilling afternoon. So thank you for everything you've done here, and to everyone in the room in these councils.
Thank you, though. I must admit that raises an issue which has come up in various events I've been and coming back, which is there are kind of three modes of engagement or governance which we're talking about. One is formal governance systems, parliaments, are making them more accountable. Another one is climate councils are making them more expensive. And another one is a push on multitudes of citizens' assemblies. I think it's then one of the things we want to do is there's lots of instruments out there. How do they work together? What's the constitutionality and legitimacy of that interaction? Because the worst thing we need is to run into each other, pushing. Each is individually wonderful, necessary, needed, but do we know how to use them as a system? And I think that's what we're trying to, in a sense, build this field, is to discuss that system impact. And obviously, David over there, I kind of noticed you watching me. That's an area we'd love to follow up with people who are interested, because tripping over our own feet would be the worst possible way to move forward from here. Michael.
Switch. Thanks. Okay. So we were talking about the accountability of climate finance, and a starting point where there was consensus in the room that we have governance is essential, that we're not going to be able to deliver unless we get the governance right. And if we don't deliver, the money's going to stop. So how do we create this virtuous circle of being able to demonstrate how inflows of finance are translating through the messy business of assuring good governance into outcomes on the ground that are good for the planet and good for people? The good news is that there are some great examples out there and some interesting things that can be scaled, that we heard some examples from the room, like innovations in procurement, great lessons that have been applied from public financial management, citizen tracking and oversight. How do you connect that to the work of parliaments and other actors in this system? So we have some things we can build around, and we know a lot of the things that can go wrong and do go wrong from other sectors that, you can see signs of already starting to happen in climate delivery. So we have an urgency to avoid repeating the same mistakes. And so the real meat of the question came about, so what's holding us back? It's like, if we know what can go wrong and we know why this is so important, like, how do we actually put this governance into practice? And we heard a number of different ways about what is holding that back. Some of it is like getting the design right. like who's involved in the room in designing these projects, making sure that they're really benefiting down to local level. We also had a lot and talked a lot about the politics of it. So politics, a big capital P in like electoral sense, and how do you keep being able to demonstrate results that can keep justification for these funds, but also politics in a local level on the implementation side. Like who has the interest in making sure that a project delivers on what it was intended to? And if you aren't thinking about those and doing that analysis and embedding that political economy perspective in from the beginning, you're not going to get the results. We know that. But the other big issue is that we're siloed. So we've got people who are in different rooms having parallel conversations who need to be linked up. So my natural home is like the good governance folks, the anti-corruption campaigners, all of these. We've got all these great ideas and tools and approaches that can be applied, but they don't often talk or sit in the same room as those who are designing climate projects or working on country platforms. So how do we bridge those odds? How do we get people to walk across the corridors? A lot of these things can be scaled in part through technology and use of open data and approaches, but like those who fund that work and know that piece of the puzzle, again, are in a different room and thinking about it in a different way. So I think one of the key takeaways for us is how do we bridge these conversations in a way that is not high transaction costs, but and allows people to see the value in collaboration, and that will create its own incentives to keep working together. And how do we not be politically savvy, but also cognizant of the urgency? So like, we need the good governance to work hand in hand with the speed that's necessary. And I think there's a bit of a false dichotomy out there that you can't have one without the other. I think we've got to be more creative than that. There are ways to be able to have effective accountability, good governance, and move at a pace. They're not mutually exclusive. But we do need to have both, and we've got to have rights and justice and those pieces built into the design. And if you don't, you'll get the holdups down the road. So a lot of work to do, but a lot of interest in the room to do it. And I would love to think how to connect across with the other rooms that we're going on.
So we want to make sure you can go to whatever your next party is, meeting, reception, and keynote. So what we're going to do is ask each of the panelists a question which has a pithy answer. You're going to give me, that's a huge question. Don't worry, it's the starter. And I'm going to ask you at the end, that's why I'm pre-briefing you with 2 minutes. If you were standing in a room with Andre Delago saying, this is what you should get leaders to agree at the Leaders Summit in Belém on governance, what would it be? So that's a doable thing. He's around the corner. In fact, it's literally 10 minutes away if you run fast. So I'm going to, first, that's the end question. But the question now is, we've talked together about this challenge between, taking litigation and moving good governance. And as you were, gone through this day, what do you think about how do we make that discussion between the strategic legal field and the governance field and kind of law policy wonks work better, so we could have make those things actually work together? What are some of the things you'd like to see, or the conversations you would like to have coming out this day? More questions and answers, but just interested.
So what's the interaction between governance and litigation, essentially?
And how should those bits of the field work together?
Yeah. So, I mean, ideally, litigation is always a last resort, right? You only litigate when you've exhausted all other remedies. And, we Client Earth, we're mostly in the news when we litigate, but actually we do a huge amount of engagement and policy work. And, I think what we need to be doing is working in a much more collaborative way, in a propositional way on what does good look like. And, we touched before on food systems and land use. Well, how do we work together with the food industry, for example, on the sort of regulations on supply chain integrity that are needed? And then the litigation comes and focuses the minds of the laggards, right? But we need to be actually capturing the energy of leaders across the economy, and then and advocating for what good looks like, what are high standards in legal and regulatory terms. And then you have the litigation to come in and galvanize and nip at the heels of those that aren't moving fast enough.
You sometimes do more than nip. I've been told. Wendy, again, it was brought up by Michael. We are in favour of speed. We are not a slow movement. We are a fast movement, but an accountable movement and an inclusive movement. and that is another trilemma. How many trilemmas? But we're also facing a simplification agenda and a bunch of people wanting to simplify, rollback, etc. Again, back from the corporate, how should we address that? Again, where are the entry points for addressing that? Is it attention? Is it not attention? How should the field of governance address the speed simplification agenda, which is, especially if you work in the EU, is everywhere at the moment, and sometimes people just go no. But just interested in your thoughts of that and the responsible corporate side of that. Sorry, the big questions, short answers.
No.
Warning of the easy question.
I have an answer to the other question, but yes, okay. So because Nick dropped that on me, you're going to get my unfiltered, honest answer. I think we focus too much on governance. I think if we want trillions of dollars a year to flow into tripling renewable energy systems and the smart cities required to support that and the massive electrification, I think we need less governance, not more governance. I think we need, and this partly answers your next question, I think focusing the entire solution on disclosure, on monitoring, verification, reporting, disclosure, stifles the movement, the financial flows that we require, especially the cross-border financial flows. So the conversation needs to mature into a trade and investment conversation, into countries thinking about, Kenya, New Zealand, PLC. UK does this really well. UK PLC, what are our net exports? Where are our opportunities? And how do we align those with a Paris commitment aligned world? And that's not about stopping people doing things. It's about creating, and I learned this from Client Earth, glide rails. And I think we just need to do more of that and just leave the governance kind of where it is now, because that alone doesn't solve it.
See, that's why I like these kind of questions. If we trusted people's intent more, we would have to govern them less. Your little big question is, you sit and advise lots of funders, you look at fields, that's your field, is your thing. Looking around here, what's the most exciting untapped synergies across the field you found today? Not asking for grant proposals, but just things that you see kind of that's where a thing could be leveraged. There's some real value we could grab there.
Sorry, Nick. I do just want to come back on that point, though. It's not about having too much governance. It's having good governance. Good governance can be really simple. It doesn't have to be super complex. It doesn't have to be spending years negotiating a standard. You can have good governance that is a lighter touch, but you need the governance. It's not that you don't have it. It's just it's effective and it's fit for purpose. So and it's got to apply as much to the government finance and the government systems, not just the private sector. So it's got to work on both sides. But I mean, there are points of hope. I mean, I do think. So we heard examples of very small projects with little amount of money that are bringing local community groups who are on the sharp end and trying to manage climate adaptation with those who have expertise on how to bring their voice into some of these project design conversations, how to help leverage their agency and assure that they're going to get an adaptation project that meets community local needs, which means they have an interest in making sure that that delivers on time and does it. So there are some interesting, when you start to make these connections, you can find, as I say, a mutually reinforcing way of people seeing the value of connecting across. And I think there's a need for some of the political scientists to get more in the room and get engaged. And I think some ways of perhaps scaling that. I think we heard some intriguing pieces about I think we have too much of a tendency to say that climate is different and we have to have something that's customized for climate because like it's urgent and there's all these things. And actually There's a lot of good stuff that you could just extend to climate. You might have to tweak it, but you don't actually have to reinvent something from scratch. And that's the bit that frustrates me. So I think there's still some easy wins on that front, to be honest.
Thank God there's nothing we have to invent. If we can copy, I'd be so happy. So now we're going to go to, you're in front of the ambassador. What's your ask?
I would love for 10 years on from Paris for Belém, the COP at Belém, to be the year that the presidency and all the parties to the COP come together and they say we need really good NDCs underpinned by really good national climate legislation. I think that's critically important to provide the clarity and glide path that is needed for countries everywhere, not just countries, for all the subnational actors.
I would like the presidency has done a really good job of bringing the circle of finance ministers, and it's too selective. It's not inclusive enough of a circle, arguably, but I think that's really valuable. But the problem with stimulating finance flows in order to meet the climate objectives, we need more than just finance ministers. This is not a fiscal tax solution. It's a whole financial system solution. So we need the trade ministers. We need the business ministers, if there are such things. We need whatever the business center is for the particular country. So I don't think it's enough just to be talking about municipal or national budgetary management and fiscal finance raising systems. And for example, in our carbon pricing mechanisms work, we insist on not making this a finance minister decision, because if climate finance is an opportunity to raise revenue, it's the wrong conversation. What we need to do is stimulate finance flows into transition investment.
Finance ministers will finance minister. Michael.
I think it's the invest in accountability. It pays back many times over, and it's an answer to your trust problem. And if we don't win back on the trust arguments, we're done for. And accountability, and I'm not just talking about accountability in the multi-stakeholdism at the global level negotiations. I mean down into local level where people on, one of our speakers is talking about their local pub and the debates there and people's perceptions of climate projects and how, if they benefit or not. We got to get down to that level. And accountability mechanisms down that chain will help to allow people to see, actually, no, I do have a stake in this. I am benefiting, or be very clear if they're not. And then, okay, we do need to change it. But otherwise, we're not going to win them back. And then we've lost the whole argument.
Thank you very much. I'll WhatsApp and Andre with those suggestions after this. Please thank the panel. That was brilliant. Thanks for summing up so many things and asking such big questions. One day you'll work out how to play with the
Right.
Thanks, Nick, Laura, Wendy, and Michael for that very animated and great panel discussion. So you've brought the room back up, and to close, we are delighted to be joined by Alice Amarine from the COP30 team. Thank you for taking the time to come and see us today. It's been brilliant at London Climate Action Week this week to have Brazil here in force. And this is a real opportunity to hear your thoughts in terms of where Brazil is at with your climate governance, but also the road to COP30. What do you need? What are you thinking? And how can we help? So Alice, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Yeah, it's working. Great. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, especially as Nick is going to make my job much easier to share with Andre a lot of those insights and so on. I'm actually, I must say, to be honest, I'm itching to engage with the conversation with my previous hat coming from as a lawyer and working in civil society in the past 10 years or so in the climate space, and seeing actually in funding and supporting the whole ecosystem of climate governance in Brazil to flourish. But I'll stick to the plan on COP30 and a more presidential perspective. Every single week in the past 7 months that I'm actually working in the Brazilian government, we get the same question from mayors, from legislators, from state governors on what can I do for the COP30? What is my role in implementing the NDC? What do I need to do to actually accelerate the energy transition on my space? And how can I survive if transitioning away from fossil fuels is really happening and my health system, my education system is fully dependent on royalties or on fiscal resources and so on? We always try to help answering those questions, but in the end, it all goes back to the governance system, right? The way we organize the system, the mechanisms that we can put in place, in one hand, to explain much better what we are doing, where do we want to go, and how we are going to bring people in. And at the same time, make people understand what are the trade-offs that they need to do now to start implementing bolder, inclusive climate action in a way that won't it won't put them at risk, either political risk or actually governability risk. When the president ambassador has started putting the letters out there and we started getting this concept of we are changing, this is a different moment, we are changing towards implementation. We all knew that, right? We know, we have been following the Paris regulation in the past 10 years of COPs. But are COPs really ready to be implementation driven? I mean, as a tool, as an instrument, as the capacity of UNFCCC ecosystem is really ready, has the instruments to do that? We don't think so. We know that there is a lot has been done in the past year, and this is a core value of our presidency, to build, to not start from scratch, to not start from zero, but actually building upon a lot of those learnings of the past 10 years to take the best out of that as the fastest and more effective way possible. When we talk about, in our last letter launched last week, about having an action agenda that is anchored in the implementation of the GST, we are not creating something new. That's something that the commitment is already there. All countries already signed for that. That's a lot already going on, right? On doubling, on tripling. Most people have never even heard outside of this room, heard about the GST. They don't know what that is. They don't know what it's written there beyond maybe paragraph 28, 33, potentially, maybe. But we need to make sure that we create systems that are coherent with themselves. I'm asking myself, when we think about the NDC process, especially as Brazil has put a lot of effort in putting an NDC up front as soon as possible last year. And then we look at 7 months later and we have 23 countries with NDC submitted. What does that tell us about the governance and about the commitment to what has already been agreed? So we are trying as much as we can to convey the message and show that in the end of the day, we are exploding the climate bubble, right? We are mainstream. Our main task, not as COP30 presidency only, but ourselves as a community, is to mainstream climate in every single economic, financial, institutional decision. And all different levels. We need to bring the municipalities in. We need to bring the indigenous communities in. We need to bring the farmers who are asking for rural credit to ask for resilient rural credit. So this task, I think it's some of the elements that were brought here, I think we fully agree. We need to have the laws. We need to implement the laws. But that won't be enough. So we need to be innovative. And on that. That's why we bring the spirit of the mutirão as well, as a sense of complementarity, as a sense of being solution driven, as a sense of being experimental in terms of how we implement the actions, how we build governance structures. I think the council is one example of that. There is no one size fits all. Of course, we know that. Even Brazil, we have a council or the forum since 2009. And at every different levels, did that work to actually prevent legislators to rule, to pass bills that are completely against 1.5 principle? No, it hasn't. So how can we do that better? And how can we create a sense of a better, let's say, holistic approach to governance that is also inspired by what we are looking into in FCCC 5 stars, right? We need to have capacity. We need to work on mitigation and adaptation. We need to work on technology. That's also underneath the whole discussion on information integrity as well. How can we bring not only technology, but talk about comms, we can talk about information, we can talk about platforms in a way that it's actually leading us to a better governance system. So we do feel that in that front, Brazil does have a lot of experience to maybe have COP30 as a unique moment to claim for governance, but we do need you all. We need all countries to come on board. We need civil society to come on board. We need academia to come on board. Because the COPs, again, they are not silver bullets. But if nothing else, they are still organizing this conversation as we go. We need to make COP an everyday issue. We need to make climate not an everyday issue in their impacts, which they are already for most people, but to be something that it's driving all the actions, all the institutions, all the efforts. So thank you so much. We count on you.
Thank you, Alice. And exploding the climate bubble. I think that is a great note to end on, and a great bit to take away. At London Climate Action Week this week, we are going under the banner "Don't Tell Me Climate Action Isn't Happening," which you can come and see at 8:30 tomorrow morning at Piccadilly Circus if you'd like to see it on the big screen and really drive it home. But I guess that is a bit the point, right? Is that the governance really matters and the practice really matters. So I hope that we've actually started to bring some of that together. I am now standing between you and a drink, and also some of you we would love. There have been a number of, we had a whole series of events. Yes, Michael, they were somewhat in parallel because we sort of made the trade-off, I suppose, that we wanted to have a bit of a deeper dive on some of the topics and also to be more interactive. And by doing so, we also created these parallel tracks. So I guess it's a good reminder that we need to go back into our community of practice and into our day-to-day work, and we need to come back together and kind of work in a bit of a dance. So we said in terms of objectives for today that we wanted to somewhat think about together how could we elevate in national and international discussions the role of governance and the function of governance. And I think we've heard from Alice some very specific things that we can work together on around the COP30 agenda and how we all need to help you to do that. So that is one takeaway. We also said that we really wanted to sort of explore. I suppose I called it the sort of thought leadership, but also the practice leadership, and working with the International Climate Councils Network, it very much is governance in action. There's a few things that stand out around the challenges of resilience, political resilience. We talked about the information integrity, the work with the UN, and that Brazil is also very heavily involved in and building, and really just this question of trust. But I think there are a number of areas that we need to go away and do some work on. At E3G, one of the things we are working on and had some discussions around is kind of just a bit of a reality check on the idea that there is a backlash. It's really not borne out by the public opinion evidence, which is quite extraordinarily in favour of climate action, renewable energy, and a lot of other things. So I think rather than worrying about the backlash, I think we need to be more confident about engaging with and delivering on that demand, really, that there is action, and actually that through acting on climate, we can actually help build trust and confidence and deliver more. The third thing we talked about for today was around kind of field building and the community of practice, or maybe a kind of a thinking about multiple communities of practice. And I suppose the challenge for us is to work across different areas, to learn from different areas, to not reinvent the wheel, but also perhaps not to be too caught up in our own tools and solutions, right? We sometimes need to build new institutions. We sometimes need to build new tools and innovate. Sometimes we need to make the ones that are there work better or be more receptive to public opinion, or to be more accountable. But it's a mixed approach, right? And that's the kind of practice that I think we need to challenge ourselves to do more there. I'm going to finish with a few thank yous to the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, to Wendy Miles. She might have gone because she's getting a train to Glastonbury. Wendy, thank you. To the TAI Collaborative, to Michael Jarvis, thank you for your collaboration. We really appreciate it. I personally value it, and the E3G TAI Collaborative goes back more than a decade of thinking about how do we build bridges between the kind of good governance world and the climate world. So I think now is our moment, Michael. So let's work on that. To our panel and roundtable collaborators, Client Earth, Globe Legislators, IIGCC, We Mean Business, and others, thank you. It's been a tremendous collaboration. To the International Climate Council's network, to all our members, thank you for coming and gathering in London. And also to those who were not able to come today, including our members from Pakistan, from Nigeria, and from South Africa. We would have loved to have you with us in London, but thank you for your participation in the network, and we hope to gather with you soon. And also I want to thank the incredible International Climate Council's Network Secretariat team, in particular to Izzy for organising and carrying a huge weight of organising today and bringing you all to this room. And also to Ben Rhodes, my colleague, who ably leads the Secretariat team, and to Tessa Vincent, who is also around and collaborating with many of you. And also to all our speakers today, and to all of you for being here and for helping us create something at London Climate Action Week. So I'll draw the forum to a close and invite you to stay and have a drink and to continue the discussions, and then also to go out and enjoy the last 3 days of London Climate Action Week. Thank you.